The letter trembled in Lydia Harper's frost-bitten fingers as she stood before the weathered ranch house, her two children pressed against her skirts. She had traveled 1,800 miles on a stranger's promise, a widowed rancher seeking a practical wife, a partnership built on necessity rather than romance. But when Caleb Turner opened that door, his storm-gray eyes held no welcome, only hesitation, only regret. The Montana wind cut through her threadbare coat, yet somehow the cold radiating from the man in the doorway felt sharper. She had gambled everything on one letter and lost. Thank you for joining this story. Please watch until the end and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this journey travels. The stagecoach had deposited them at the crossroads 3 hours before sunset, the driver's parting words still echoing in Lydia's memory. "You sure about this, ma'am? Ain't nothing out here but wind and regret." She had nodded with more confidence than she felt, hoisting 6-year-old Emma onto her hip while 9-year-old Thomas clutched their single carpet bag. The driver had tipped his hat, his weathered face creased with something between pity and respect, then urged his horses forward without another word. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the vast white silence, leaving the three of them alone on a ribbon of frozen road that disappeared into the darkening pines. "Mama, I'm cold." Emma's small voice cut through the wind. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little farther now." Lydia adjusted her daughter's weight and squinted at the hand-drawn map Caleb Turner had included with his last letter. The ranch should be visible once they crested the next rise. Should be. Thomas walked ahead with the determined stride of a boy trying to be the man of the family, though his thin shoulders hunched against the bitter wind. He had been 7 when his father died, too young to understand the consumption that had stolen Samuel Harper's breath inch by terrible inch, but old enough to remember the promises made at his bedside. Take care of your mother. Take care of your sister. The weight of those promises showed in every stiff step through the snow. Lydia's feet had gone numb an hour ago, and her breath came in white clouds that crystallized on her collar. The sun hung low and sullen behind a veil of gray clouds, draining color from the world until everything became variations of white and shadow. She thought of the small apartment in Philadelphia they'd left behind, cramped and drafty, but familiar, safe in its predictability. This had been anything but predictable. The advertisement had appeared in the Philadelphia Gazette 3 months ago, tucked between notices for patent medicines and farm equipment. Widowed rancher, Montana Territory, seeks practical wife. Must accept children. No romance required, only partnership and honest work. Respond to Caleb Turner, Pine Ridge. She had read it 7 times before allowing herself to consider it seriously. Romance. She had learned that particular lesson. Samuel had been romance, all sweet words and grand dreams that evaporated under the harsh light of reality. He had loved her desperately and provided for them poorly, his artistic temperament unsuited to the steady grind of employment. When the consumption took him, he left behind paintings nobody wanted and debts nobody could ignore. The landlord had given her 2 months. Lydia had spent the first month working her fingers raw doing piecework for a dressmaker, washing linens for a boarding house, taking in mending until her eyes burned in the lamplight. The second month, she had answered the advertisement. Caleb Turner's letters had been brief and practical, exactly as promised. He owned a cattle ranch in the Montana high country. His wife had died 2 years prior. He needed help managing the household and preferred someone who understood hardship, who wouldn't mistake partnership for poetry. The arrangement would be legal and proper, a true marriage, but built on mutual benefit rather than sentiment. "I won't lie and say I'm easy company," he had written in his 3rd letter. "Grief changes a man, but I'm honest and sober, and I'll provide for you and your children as my own. If you can accept a life of hard work and sparse conversation, there's a home here. Stable. Permanent. Stable. Permanent." The words had glowed like coals in her mind. She had sold everything they owned except what fit in the carpet bag, used the money for train tickets to the edge of Montana Territory, then a stagecoach to the crossroads. Caleb had promised to meet them, but when the stage arrived, only emptiness greeted them. The driver had offered to take them back to town, but the return fare was money she didn't have. So they walked. "Mama!" Thomas's shout jerked her from her thoughts. He stood atop the rise, pointing down into the valley. "I see it!" Lydia's heart lurched. She shifted Emma to her other hip and climbed the last few yards, her breath catching when the view opened before them. The ranch sprawled across the valley floor like a promise half kept. The main house was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories of weathered timber with smoke curling from the chimney. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a stable, what looked like a bunkhouse and storage shed. Fences marked paddocks where horses stood with their backs to the wind, and further out she could see cattle gathered in the lee of a hillside. It was real, solid, everything the letters had promised. "Come on!" She quickened her pace, ignoring the protest of her frozen feet. "We're almost there." The road wound down into the valley, and with each step, details emerged. The house needed paint. One of the barn doors hung crooked. The snow in the yard was churned and dirty, marked with hoof prints and boot tracks that spoke of daily labor. This was a working ranch, not a picture from a magazine. Exactly what she'd expected. Exactly what she needed. They reached the front porch as the last light drained from the sky. Lydia set Emma down and smoothed her daughter's tangled hair, then brushed snow from Thomas's shoulders. Her own reflection in the window showed a woman she barely recognized, gaunt and windburned, her dark hair escaping its pins, her coat patched and repatched until the original fabric was more memory than reality. She looked like desperation, but she lifted her chin anyway, straightened her spine, and knocked. Silence. Then footsteps, heavy and deliberate. The door opened. Caleb Turner filled the doorway, and Lydia's carefully rehearsed greeting died in her throat. He was nothing like she'd imagined. Taller, for one, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that blocked the lamplight behind him. His face was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, a dark beard covering his jaw, and eyes the color of a winter storm. He wore work clothes, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows despite the cold, and his hands, she noticed his hands, were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who understood labor. But it was his expression that stopped her heart. Not anger, not cruelty, just a deep, bone-weary reluctance that made her stomach drop. "Mr. Turner?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to the children pressed against her sides, then to the single carpet bag Thomas clutched. Something flickered in his expression. Regret, maybe, or resignation. "Mrs. Harper." His voice was rough, unused to conversation. "You're here." It wasn't a welcome. It was an observation, flat and final. Yes, I apologize for the timing. I sent a telegram from the last station, but perhaps it didn't arrive?" She hated the uncertainty in her voice, the way it lifted into a question. "It arrived." The silence stretched between them like frozen ground. Emma whimpered and burrowed deeper into Lydia's skirt. Thomas stood rigid, his young face carefully blank in the way children learn when adults make the world uncertain. Caleb's jaw worked, muscles tightening beneath his beard. He looked past them, at the darkness gathering over the valley, and something in his posture shifted, not softening exactly, but yielding to some internal argument. "Come in." He stepped back, the words more command than invitation. "You'll freeze out there." The warmth hit her like a wall when they crossed the threshold. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace, and oil lamps cast golden light across a main room that was sparse but clean. A heavy wooden table dominated the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Shelves lined one wall, holding books and tools and other objects whose purposes she couldn't immediately identify. Doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms and a kitchen, and a staircase climbed to the second floor. It was a bachelor's house, functional and unadorned, but it was clean. That counted for something. Caleb closed the door behind them, shutting out the wind, and moved to the fireplace without a word. He added another log with practiced efficiency, then straightened and turned to face them. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, though the hard lines around his eyes aged him. A scar cut through his right eyebrow, and another traced his jaw beneath his beard. His hands, when he crossed his arms over his chest, were never quite still. "I wasn't expecting you for another 2 weeks," he said finally. "I sent a telegram explaining the change. The landlord, circumstances forced us to leave earlier than planned." "I got the telegram." His tone made it clear this was part of the problem. Lydia felt Thomas press closer to her side. She placed a hand on his shoulder, drawing strength from the contact. I apologize if the timing is inconvenient, Mr. Turner. But we're here now, and according to your letters, things have changed. The words dropped like stones. Emma started crying, the soft, hiccuping sobs of a child pushed past exhaustion. Lydia automatically lifted her, settling her daughter on her hip, but her eyes never left Caleb's face. Changed how? He looked away, his gaze fixing on some point beyond the window. This was a mistake. The letters, the arrangement, all of it. I thought... He trailed off, jaw working. I thought I was ready. I'm not. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. I don't understand. We had an agreement. You sent for me. I know what I did. His voice turned sharp, then deliberately softened. But I can't do this. I'm sorry. I'll give you money for the return trip, enough to get you settled somewhere, but you can't stay here. The words hit like physical blows. Lydia heard them from a great distance, filtered through the roaring in her ears. She had expected many things. Hardship? Yes. Sparse conversation and difficult work, certainly. But not this. Not rejection before she'd even removed her coat. I see. She was proud of how steady her voice sounded. We've come 1,800 miles, Mr. Turner. Spent every cent we had on the journey. And you're turning us away because things changed? Guilt flashed across his face, but he didn't back down. I'll pay for your travel. I'll write letters of reference. But I can't... He stopped, swallowed hard. This house can't take more loss. Understanding clicked into place. The late wife. The 2 years of solitude. The letters written in a moment of loneliness, perhaps, or practical need, but never truly meant. He was afraid. Lydia had survived her husband's death and the slow dissolution of everything they'd built. She had held her children while they cried for a father who couldn't rise from his sickbed. She had sold her wedding ring to pay for medicine that didn't work and stood dry-eyed at a grave she couldn't afford to mark properly. She understood fear intimately, but she had also learned that fear was a luxury people with children couldn't afford. Emma Thomas, go sit by the fire and warm up. She kept her voice gentle but firm, waiting until her children obeyed before turning back to Caleb. Mr. Turner, I understand you're frightened, but we had an agreement. A legal commitment you made in writing. I'll compensate you. With what? The question came out sharper than intended. Money for train tickets back to what? An apartment we no longer have? A city with no work and no prospects? You wrote to me about partnership and honesty. You promised stability. If that promise meant nothing, you should have said so before I sold everything we owned and dragged my children across the country. His face hardened. I'm not the villain here. Neither am I. She refused to look away. I'm a woman trying to survive with 2 children depending on me. You offered a solution. I accepted. If you've changed your mind, that's your right. But don't pretend I'm unreasonable for expecting you to honor your word. The silence stretched taut between them. Emma had stopped crying, and Thomas sat perfectly still, his young face watchful. The fire crackled, wind rattled the windows. Caleb's hands curled into fists, then slowly relaxed. You can stay tonight. There's a bedroom upstairs. Clean sheets, warm enough. Tomorrow, I'll drive you to town, make arrangements for your journey. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was more than he'd offered initially. Lydia nodded, pride forcing her spine straight. Thank you. The kitchen's through there, he gestured to a doorway. Help yourself to whatever you need. I'll be in the barn if... He stopped, seemingly unable to finish the sentence. I'll be in the barn. He grabbed a heavy coat from a peg by the door and left without another word, the door closing behind him with terrible finality. Lydia stood frozen for a long moment, aware of her children's eyes on her, aware of the warmth and light surrounding them that would disappear come morning. Then she squared her shoulders and moved to the fireplace, kneeling between Emma and Thomas. Everything's going to be fine, she said, willing it to be true. Thomas's jaw was set in a way that reminded her painfully of his father. He doesn't want us here. No, he doesn't. She saw no point in lying. But we're here tonight, and that means warm beds and hot food. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Emma sniffled. Are we going away again? Maybe. Lydia smoothed her daughter's hair, but not tonight. Tonight we're safe and warm. That's enough. She rose and explored the kitchen, finding it better stocked than expected. Dried beef, potatoes, eggs, flour. coffee. The pantry held preserves and canned goods, and a root cellar beneath the floor stored winter vegetables. A man living alone had no need for such abundance, which meant Caleb had prepared for their arrival even as he dreaded it. The realization twisted something in her chest. She made a simple meal, fried potatoes and eggs, bread with butter and jam. The children ate mechanically, too exhausted for appetite but obedient to her gentle insistence. She forced down a few bites herself, then washed the dishes in water heated on the stove, each motion automatic and familiar. The bedroom upstairs was as promised, a wide bed with a thick quilt, clean sheets that smelled of soap and sunshine, a braided rug on the floor. A washstand held a pitcher and basin, and pegs on the wall offered space for clothes they no longer owned. A window looked out over the valley, showing darkness now, but she imagined the view in daylight would be stunning. She helped the children wash and change into night clothes, then tucked them into bed together. Emma fell asleep almost instantly, but Thomas lay rigid, staring at the ceiling. "Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Papa wouldn't have sent us away." The words cut deep. "No," she agreed quietly. "He wouldn't have. But your papa also couldn't provide for us. Mr. Turner he's just frightened right now." "Why? How did you explain grief to a 9-year-old who carried his own?" "His wife died. Sometimes that makes it hard to let new people in." "Your husband died too. You're not sending people away." Lydia had no answer for that. She kissed his forehead and smoothed his hair until his breathing deepened and his body relaxed into sleep. Then she sat in the wooden chair by the window and let the careful composure crumble. She didn't cry. She had learned years ago that tears were another luxury she couldn't afford. But she let herself feel the weight of failure, the crushing reality that she had gambled everything on a stranger's promise and lost. Tomorrow they would return to what? She had enough money for perhaps a week in a boarding house, if she could find work immediately. If she couldn't, the poorhouse, the orphanage, the slow, grinding destruction of her family. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched the dark shape of the barn where a lamp burned in a single window. Caleb Turner was out there, probably congratulating himself on his narrow escape, relieved to have avoided the complication of a ready-made family. Or maybe he was as miserable as she was. The thought came unbidden, and she tried to dismiss it. His feelings weren't her concern, but the image persisted. A man alone in a cold barn, surrounded by the work that filled his days, but couldn't touch the emptiness in his life. This house can't take more loss. Not wouldn't, couldn't. As if the walls themselves held too much grief to accommodate anything else. Lydia understood that feeling. After Samuel died, their apartment had felt haunted by all the futures they'd never have. Every object held memories, his easel gathering dust, his coffee cup she couldn't bear to use, his chair at the table that remained eternally empty. She had wanted to burn it all, start fresh, be anywhere but surrounded by ghosts. Perhaps Caleb's letters had been written in a similar moment of desperate clarity. A realization that he couldn't live with ghosts forever. And then she had actually appeared, solid and real and impossible to ignore, and the ghosts had risen up in protest. She was being too generous, making excuses for a man who had made promises he couldn't keep. And yet, movement in the yard caught her eye. Caleb emerged from the barn, his collar turned up against the wind, and crossed to the house with quick, purposeful strides. She heard the front door open and close, heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard them pause outside the bedroom door. She held her breath. A soft knock. "Mrs. Harper?" "Yes?" She kept her voice low, mindful of the sleeping children. "Just checking you have everything you need." "We're fine, thank you." Silence. Then, "There's more quilts in the chest if it gets too cold." "All right." She waited for him to leave. Instead, she heard him shift his weight, heard the faint creak of floorboards. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "This isn't how I wanted things to go." The words hung in the darkness between them. Lydia closed her eyes. "How did you want them to go?" "I don't know. Different." "Different how?" "Just different." It was the answer of a man who had no answers, and somehow that made it more honest than any practiced speech. Lydia felt her anger soften, just slightly. "We'll leave at first light," she said. "You won't have to see us again." "It's not about wanting—" He stopped, exhaled hard. Never mind. Get some rest. His footsteps retreated down the hall, and a door closed with quiet finality. Lydia returned to her vigil at the window, watching the darkness, waiting for dawn. The night dragged on with agonizing slowness. She dozed in the chair, startling awake at every creak of the house settling, every gust of wind against the windows. Once, she thought she heard footsteps in the hallway, but when she opened the door, the corridor was empty. Caleb Turner's bedroom was at the far end of the hall, and no light showed beneath his door. But she wondered if he slept any better than she did. Around 4 in the morning, Emma woke crying from a nightmare. Lydia held her, rocking gently, singing the old lullaby Samuel used to hum while he painted. The melody filled the quiet room, and for a moment she could almost feel her husband's presence. Not the sick, wasting man at the end, but the vibrant dreamer who had swept her into marriage with promises of beauty and adventure. Those promises had been lies too, in their way. Pretty lies, wrapped in poetry, but lies nonetheless. Perhaps she was destined to be betrayed by men's promises. Emma fell back asleep, and Lydia tucked her close to Thomas. Then she moved to the window again, watching for the first hint of dawn. It came slowly, a gradual lightening of the eastern sky that turned the world from black to gray. The ranch emerged from darkness like a painting developing, the barn and outbuildings, the fences and paddocks, the mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. It was beautiful, harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful. She turned from the window and began gathering their few possessions, repacking the carpet bag with quiet efficiency. Thomas stirred but didn't wake. Emma slept on, one hand curled beneath her cheek. Lydia carried the bag downstairs and set it by the front door. Then she moved to the kitchen and started coffee, because some habits were too ingrained to break. The routine steadied her, measuring grounds, pumping water, stoking the stove to life. The familiar motions built a wall against the uncertainty ahead. She was pouring her first cup when Caleb appeared in the doorway. He looked like he'd slept even less than she had, his eyes shadowed and his hair uncombed. He'd changed into clean work clothes, but his shirt was only half tucked, and he'd missed a button. The small imperfection made him seem more human, less like the immovable force who had turned them away. "Coffee's ready," Lydia said, keeping her tone neutral. He nodded and crossed to the stove, pouring himself a cup. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen, the table between them, drinking in silence. Finally, Caleb spoke. "I'll hitch the wagon after breakfast. Town's about 3 hours in good weather. Should make it by mid-morning." "Thank you." "There's a boarding house run by a woman named Sarah Mitchell. She's decent, won't overcharge you." "I appreciate the recommendation." More silence. The coffee was terrible, too strong and bitter, but Lydia drank it anyway. "You know how to cook?" Caleb asked abruptly. The question caught her off guard. "Yes." "Clean, mend?" "Of course." "Handle livestock?" "I've never tried, but I'm willing to learn." He stared into his coffee cup, jaw working. "Your children, they seem well behaved." "They are." "The boy. Thomas?" "He looks strong. He's 9, and yes, he's strong for his age." Caleb nodded slowly, still not meeting her eyes. "The arrangement in the letters, you understood what I was offering. It wasn't romance, just partnership." "I understood perfectly. I'm not looking for romance either, Mr. Turner. I had that with my first husband. It ended poorly." She set her cup down with more force than intended. "What I need is stability, safety for my children, the opportunity to work for our keep without fear of the door closing behind us. And you'd be content with that? No expectations beyond work and practical partnership?" "Content is a luxury. I'll settle for survival." The words came out harder than she meant them, but she didn't soften them. Let him see what desperation looked like. Let him understand the stakes. Caleb's hands tightened on his cup. "My wife." He stopped, swallowed. "Her name was Rebecca. She died giving birth to our daughter. The baby died too, same day. 2 years ago this spring." Lydia's breath caught. She hadn't known about the child. "This house was supposed to be full of life," he continued, his voice rough. "We planned for children, for family, built the extra bedroom upstairs thinking we'd fill it. Then in one day, all that ended. Since then, it's just been me and the work and the silence." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it hurt to witness. I wrote those letters on a good day, he said. A day when I thought I could do this. Bring people in, start over, build something new. But when you showed up, when I saw you and your children standing on that porch, all I could think was how much it would hurt to lose you too. The confession hung between them, honest and terrible. So you decided to lose us immediately instead, Lydia said quietly, before we could matter. Yes. At least he didn't lie about it. She poured herself more coffee, her hands steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Mr. Turner, I can't promise we won't die. None of us can. But I can promise that if you send us away now, you'll regret it. Not because of what we might have been to each other, but because you'll know you chose fear over possibility, and that's a choice you'll carry for the rest of your life. Better than carrying grief. Is it? She met his gaze directly. Because from where I'm standing, you seem to be carrying that just fine. The barb hit home. His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might snap back. Instead, he set his cup down and moved to the window, staring out at the emerging dawn. I'm not a good man to live with, he said finally. I'm used to silence. I don't make conversation. I work hard and expect the same from others. I've got a temper, though I've never raised a hand to anyone who didn't deserve it, and I don't drink or gamble or waste money. But I'm not easy company. I didn't come here for easy, Mr. Turner. Caleb. He turned to face her. If you're going to live in this house, you should call me Caleb. The shift in tense didn't escape her notice. Not if you were going to live, but if you're going to live. Her heart began to hammer. Does that mean I'm saying I'm willing to try? The words came out rough, forced. If you still are, knowing what you're getting into. Lydia gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. The original arrangement, partnership, not romance? Yes. Legal marriage? Yes. You'll treat my children as your own? His hesitation was brief but noticeable. Then, I'll try. That's the best I can promise. I'll try. It wasn't everything, but it was honest. And honestly, at this point was more than most men offered. Then yes, she said. I'm willing to try too. The silence that followed felt different than before. Not comfortable exactly, but less hostile. A truce, perhaps, or the beginning of one. Caleb nodded once, sharp and decisive. Right. Then you'll need to know how things work around here. I've got 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, Sam and Pete. Good men, but rough around the edges. They take meals in their own quarters unless I specifically invite them to the house. There's cattle to tend, horses to care for, and more work than daylight hours. I'll expect you to manage the house, cooking, cleaning, laundry. If you can handle a garden come spring, that's a help too. I can manage all of that. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles east. Town is 12 miles north. We make the trip once a week for supplies, more often if necessary. Church on Sundays if the weather allows. Lydia noticed he said church without warmth, a social obligation rather than spiritual practice. Doctor's in town too, Caleb continued. Name's Henderson, charges fair. We keep medical supplies here, basic things, but anything serious requires a trip. He ran through more details, water pump maintenance, woodpile management, the temperamental stove that required specific handling, which horses were safe for riding and which weren't. Lydia absorbed it all, filing away information while part of her mind still reeled from the sudden reversal. Footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. Thomas appeared, fully dressed, his young face wary. Mama? Good morning, sweetheart. Come meet Mr. Turner properly. Thomas approached slowly, sizing up the large man with the careful assessment of a child who had learned to judge adults quickly. Caleb looked equally uncertain, his discomfort with children obvious. Thomas, this is Mr. Turner. We're going to be staying here after all. Thomas's expression didn't change. For how long? Permanently, Lydia said, watching Caleb for contradiction. He gave none. All right. Thomas turned to Caleb. Do you need help with chores? The question seemed to catch Caleb off guard. You know how to work? Yes, sir. I can carry water, stack wood, feed animals. I'm strong for my age. A ghost of something, approval maybe, crossed Caleb's face. We'll see. For now, focus on getting settled. Emma appeared next, shy and uncertain, clinging to the stair railing. Caleb looked at the small girl, and something in his expression shuddered. He turned away, addressing Lydia instead. I need to check the herd. There's food in the pantry. Help yourself. When I come back for lunch, we'll discuss more of the details. He grabbed his coat and hat and left before she could respond, the door closing firmly behind him. Thomas frowned. He doesn't like us. He doesn't know us, Lydia corrected gently. There's a difference. Now, let's make breakfast and start figuring out our new home. She kept them busy through the morning, making eggs and toast, exploring the house, unpacking their meager belongings into the bedroom upstairs. Emma found a rag doll tucked in the back of a closet, and Lydia's throat tightened when she realized it must have belonged to the daughter who never lived. But Emma clutched it with such obvious joy that Lydia didn't have the heart to take it away. They would ask Caleb when he returned. The house revealed itself slowly. Signs of Rebecca everywhere, the carefully organized pantry, the delicate curtains in the bedroom windows, the pressed wildflowers in a book on the shelf, but also signs of neglect, of a man maintaining but not caring, dust in the corners, tarnished silver, floors that needed scrubbing. Lydia rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time Caleb returned for lunch, the house smelled of lye soap and cooking food. She'd made stew from the dried beef and vegetables, thick and hearty, and fresh biscuits that filled the kitchen with warmth. Thomas had swept the floors and restacked the woodpile. Emma had carefully arranged her few possessions in the bedroom, including the rag doll. Caleb stopped in the doorway, taking in the transformation. His expression was unreadable. I hope you don't mind, Lydia said, suddenly uncertain. The house needed cleaning. It's fine. He removed his hat and coat, hanging them carefully on the pegs. Smells good. She served the meal in silence, aware of his eyes tracking her movements. The children ate quietly, still wary of this strange man in whose house they now lived. Caleb didn't attempt conversation, but he ate steadily, and she noticed he took 3 biscuits. When he finally spoke, it was to Thomas. You said you wanted to help with chores. Thomas straightened. Yes, sir. Barn needs mucking. You know how to handle a shovel? Yes, sir. Come with me after lunch. I'll show you what needs doing. Thomas's face lit with an expression Lydia hadn't seen in months. Purpose, pride, the satisfaction of being needed. Yes, sir. Thank you. Caleb grunted and returned to his food. After the meal, Lydia cleaned the kitchen while Caleb and Thomas headed to the barn. Emma stayed close, still clutching the rag doll. Mama? Is this our home now? Really? Lydia knelt and pulled her daughter close. Yes, sweetheart. Really. Mr. Turner seems sad. Out of the mouths of children. He is sad. But maybe we can help him be less sad if we're kind and patient. Will he be my papa? The question stabbed deep. He'll be your stepfather. That's different from a papa, but it can still be good. I don't remember papa very well anymore. I know, baby. That's all right. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, this doll, is it okay that I have her? Lydia had been dreading this question. I'm not sure. We need to ask Mr. Turner. But when Caleb and Thomas returned hours later, dirty and tired but satisfied, and Emma shyly showed him the doll, his reaction was unexpected. His face went white, then carefully blank. You found that in the closet? Yes, sir, Emma whispered. I'm sorry, I can put it back. No. The word came out harsh, then softened. No, you keep it. He swallowed hard. It's just collecting dust otherwise. He turned and walked away before anyone could respond, disappearing into his bedroom and closing the door with quiet finality. Thomas looked at Lydia. See? He doesn't like us. But Lydia had seen the grief in Caleb's eyes, the way his hands had trembled before he turned away. That wasn't dislike. That was pain, raw and unhealed. Give him time, she said quietly. Just give him time. The days fell into an uneasy rhythm. Caleb rose before dawn and worked until dark, coming in only for meals Lydia prepared and ate in silence. He spoke when necessary, instructions about the house, warnings about the weather, brief acknowledgments of work well done, but offered nothing beyond the practical. Thomas shadowed him like a devoted apprentice, soaking up knowledge about ranching with the desperate intensity of a boy looking for a father figure. Caleb tolerated it, occasionally explaining tasks or demonstrating techniques, but never with warmth. Still, he didn't send Thomas away, and that counted for something. Emma gave him wide berth, sensing his discomfort around her. The doll became her constant companion, and Lydia noticed that Caleb never looked directly at it. As for Lydia herself, she threw herself into managing the household with the same fierce determination that had gotten her through Samuel's death. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, reorganized the pantry, mended Caleb's work clothes, and cooked meals that made the house smell like a home. She found Rebecca's garden plot buried under snow and began planning what she would plant come spring. She caught Caleb watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable. But he never commented, never thanked her, never acknowledged the transformation she was working on his house. A week passed, then two. They fell into a pattern of coexistence that resembled partnership from a distance but felt hollow up close. Lydia shared his name, his house, his table, but not his thoughts, not his grief, not anything that truly mattered. At night, she lay in the bedroom that had been Rebecca's and wondered if she had traded one kind of loneliness for another. At least in Philadelphia, her isolation had been honest. Here, she was surrounded by people yet still fundamentally alone. But the children were warm and fed. That had to be enough. It had to be. On the 15th day, a blizzard rolled in from the north, burying the ranch under 3 feet of snow and trapping them all inside. The storm raged for 2 days, wind howling like wounded animals, snow piling against the windows until the world outside disappeared. They were confined to the house, the 4 of them, with nowhere to hide from each other. And something had to break. The first day of the storm, they moved around each other like chess pieces on a crowded board, careful, calculated, always maintaining distance. Caleb retreated to his bedroom with a stack of ledgers and emerged only for meals. Thomas read the same 3 books from the shelf until he could recite passages from memory. Emma played quietly with her doll, creating elaborate stories in whispered voices. And Lydia cooked, cleaned, mended, and tried not to feel the walls closing in. By the second morning, the silence had grown teeth. Lydia woke to find the fire nearly dead and the house cold enough to see her breath. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and descended the stairs to find Caleb already at the stove, coaxing reluctant flames to life. "Storm knocked something loose in the chimney," he said without looking up. "Drawing poorly. I'll need to check it once the wind dies down." "Is there danger?" "Not if we're careful. Keep the fire low and the damper open." She moved to the kitchen and started coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. The wind outside screamed like a living thing, rattling windows and finding every gap in the walls. Snow had drifted halfway up the glass, turning the world beyond into an undifferentiated white void. Caleb got the fire stabilized and stood, brushing soot from his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes shadowed and his jaw tight with the kind of tension that came from fighting battles no one else could see. "There's beans and salt pork," Lydia said. "I can make breakfast." "Don't bother on my account. I'm not hungry." "You need to eat." "I said I'm not hungry." The words came out sharper than necessary, and he seemed to realize it. He exhaled hard and softened his tone fractionally. "Just coffee, please." She poured him a cup and watched him drink it standing by the window, staring at the white nothing beyond. His shoulders were rigid, his free hand clenched at his side. Everything about his posture screamed discomfort, as if the forced proximity was a physical weight pressing down on him. Thomas appeared on the stairs, already dressed. "Can I help with anything, sir?" Caleb turned and Lydia saw him make an effort to smooth his expression. "Not much to do in this weather. Stock's all secured in the barn, we're just waiting it out. I could chop more kindling for when the chimney's fixed. In this wind? You'd freeze before you split the first log." Thomas's face fell, and Lydia felt a surge of protective anger. The boy was trying so hard, reaching out again and again, and Caleb either didn't notice or didn't care. "Thomas, come help me with breakfast," she said, keeping her voice level. "We can make Johnny cakes. You remember how?" "Yes, Mama." They worked side by side in the kitchen while Caleb maintained his vigil at the window. The routine of cooking steadied her nerves, measuring cornmeal, mixing in eggs and milk, heating the griddle to just the right temperature. Thomas flipped the cakes with growing confidence, and she praised each one, trying to fill the void Caleb's indifference created. Emma joined them, the rag doll tucked under one arm. She climbed into a chair at the table and watched with solemn eyes, too quiet for a 6-year-old. When the food was ready, Lydia set plates on the table. Breakfast. Caleb didn't move. I told you, I'm not hungry. Yes, I heard you. Sit down anyway. He turned, surprise flickering across his face at her tone. Excuse me? You're setting a poor example for the children, Mr. Turner. We eat together as a family, and we don't waste food, so sit down. For a long moment she thought he might refuse. His jaw worked, and his eyes flashed with something between irritation and something else she couldn't quite identify. Then slowly, he moved to the table and sat. The meal passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by the scrape of forks and the howl of wind. But they ate together, and that felt like a small victory. Afterward, Thomas volunteered to wash dishes. Emma retreated to the main room with her doll. Caleb returned to his bedroom without a word, closing the door with deliberate care. Lydia stood in the kitchen and felt the weight of failure settle over her shoulders like a heavy cloak. 2 weeks of trying, and she had made no progress. They were strangers living in the same house, bound by legal papers and necessity, but connected by nothing deeper. The afternoon crawled past. Lydia found mending to occupy her hands. Socks with holes, a shirt missing buttons, Thomas's coat that needed patching. Emma napped by the fire, exhausted by the effort of being quiet and small. Thomas eventually gave up on reading and simply stared at the flames, lost in whatever thoughts occupied a 9-year-old's mind. Around 3 o'clock, Caleb emerged from his room. He paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at the domestic scene below, then descended with heavy steps. I need to check the barn, he announced. Make sure the stock's managing the cold. Lydia looked up from her mending. In this storm? I've got a rope line strung from the house to the barn. I won't get lost. That's not what concerns me. The wind? I've been through worse. He was already pulling on his heavy coat, wrapping a scarf around his face. I'll be back within the hour. Thomas jumped up. Can I come? No. The flat refusal hit like a slap. Thomas's face flushed and his hands curled into fists. Why not? The question came out defiant, edged with all the hurt of 2 weeks' worth of rejection. Caleb paused, his hand on the door latch. Because it's dangerous, and I'm not responsible for... He stopped, seemed to hear what he was about to say, and changed direction. Because I said so. That's reason enough. You're not my father. You can't tell me what to do. The words hung in the air, sharp and terrible. Lydia set down her mending, preparing to intervene, but Caleb spoke first. No, I'm not your father. His voice had gone quiet, which somehow made it worse than shouting. But this is my house, my ranch, and while you're under my roof, you'll do as I say. Is that clear? Thomas's chin jutted forward stubbornly. Yes, sir. Good. Caleb opened the door, and the wind screamed in like an invading army. He stepped out into the white chaos and pulled the door shut behind him, leaving silence in his wake. Thomas stood rigid, fighting tears he was too proud to shed. Emma had woken and was watching with wide, frightened eyes. Lydia rose and crossed to her son, placing a hand on his shoulder. He flinched away. Don't, Mama. Thomas, he hates us. You know he does. I don't know why we're even here. He doesn't hate you. He's just scared. You keep saying that, but I think he's just mean. Thomas's voice cracked. Papa was never mean. Your papa was never asked to share his home with strangers. Then maybe we should leave, go back to Philadelphia. We managed before. Barely. The word came out harsher than she intended. We were 1 month from the street, Thomas. 1 month from losing each other. I won't apologize for choosing survival. Even if we're miserable? The question struck deep because she had been asking herself the same thing. Being warm and fed isn't miserable. It is if nobody wants us here. He pulled away and climbed the stairs, his footsteps heavy with 9-year-old despair. His bedroom door closed with a definitive thud. Lydia sank back into her chair and pressed her hands to her face. Emma climbed into her lap, seeking comfort, and Lydia held her close, breathing in the smell of her daughter's hair and trying to remember why she had thought this arrangement could possibly work. The minutes dragged past. The fire crackled. The wind howled. Caleb didn't return. After 45 minutes, Lydia began to worry. After an hour, worry turned to fear. She moved to the window and peered out, but the world beyond was nothing but white. No barn visible, no rope line, nothing. She tried the door, thinking to call out, but the wind tore the breath from her lungs and filled the house with driving snow. She slammed it shut, heart pounding. Emma, stay here. Don't move from this spot. Where are you going? To get Thomas. She climbed the stairs and knocked on his door. Thomas? I need you. He emerged, eyes red but face composed. What's wrong? Mr. Turner went to check the barn over an hour ago. He should have been back by now. Thomas's anger evaporated, replaced by instant concern. Is he hurt? I don't know, but I can't go out in that storm alone, and I need you to watch Emma while I... No. Thomas's voice was firm. You can't go out there. You don't know the way to the barn, and you'll get lost. Then what do you suggest? We wait. If he's not back in another 30 minutes, we tie ourselves together and both go. But we're not separating. The maturity in his voice caught her off guard. He sounded like Samuel in his rare moments of practical clarity, and the resemblance made her chest ache. All right. 30 minutes. They descended together and took up positions by the window, straining for any sign of movement. Emma sat at the table, clutching her doll, aware that something was wrong but too young to fully understand. 20 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Then the door burst open and Caleb stumbled in on a wave of snow and wind. He was covered in white, his scarf frozen to his face, ice clinging to his eyebrows and beard. He kicked the door shut and stood swaying, breathing hard. Lydia and Thomas rushed forward simultaneously. Gone for over an hour. One of the gone for over an hour. One of the horses, spooked by the wind, broke through a stall door. His words were slurred with cold. Had to calm her down, get her secured. You should have come back and told us. Didn't think it would take so long. He pulled off his gloves with stiff fingers. His hands were white and waxy, and when Lydia touched them, they were ice cold. Sit by the fire, now. She used her mother voice, the one that brooked no argument. To her surprise, he obeyed. Thomas brought blankets while Lydia heated water for coffee and filled a basin for his hands. Caleb sat hunched before the fire, shivering violently, and let them minister to him without protest. That alone told her how badly the cold had affected him. She knelt and placed his hands in the warm water, watching his face contort with pain as feeling returned. You could have died out there, she said quietly. But I didn't. That's not the point. You took a foolish risk for a horse. That horse is worth 6 months' income. Losing her would be... He stopped, shaking his head. You wouldn't understand. Try me. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite trust, but a recognition that she might be worth talking to. When Rebecca died, the ranch almost went under. I couldn't work, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but exist. The stock suffered. I lost half the herd that first winter, sold the rest for pennies because I wasn't paying attention to market prices. By spring, I had nothing left but debt and the breeding stock. That mare out there is the foundation of everything I've rebuilt. Without her, I start over from nothing. The raw honesty in his voice caught her unprepared. This was the most he'd said about himself since they arrived, and the vulnerability beneath the words made him seem suddenly, unexpectedly human. I understand that kind of loss, Lydia said softly. After Samuel died, I tried to hold on to our apartment, our furniture, everything that proved we'd existed as a family. I fought until there was nothing left to fight with. Sometimes survival means letting go of what you want to save and protecting what you need to keep. That mare is worth 6 months' income. But you're worth more than that. And if you'd frozen to death in that barn, the mare would have died anyway when no one came to feed her. Caleb's jaw tightened, and he looked away. But he didn't argue. Thomas appeared with coffee, and Caleb wrapped his hands around the cup, wincing as warmth seeped into frozen fingers. The boy hovered uncertainly, clearly wanting to help but unsure how. Thank you, Thomas, Caleb said quietly. The simple acknowledgement made Thomas flush with pleasure. You're welcome, sir. I'm sorry for earlier. What I said, it came out wrong. Thomas shifted his weight. It's all right. It's not. You offered to help, and I shut you down without explanation. That wasn't fair. Caleb took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. The truth is, I'm not used to being responsible for other people. For 2 years, if I took a risk and got hurt, it only affected me. Now there are 3 other people depending on me, and I don't know how to... He trailed off, struggling for words. I don't know how to be what you need me to be. The confession hung in the air, unexpected and disarming. Lydia found her voice first. We don't need you to be anything except honest. If something's dangerous, say so and explain why. If you need help, ask for it. If you can't handle company, tell us that too. We're all trying to figure out how to live together, but we can't do that if you keep shutting us out. Caleb's hands tightened on the coffee cup. I'm not good at talking. We've noticed. A ghost of something that might have been humor flickered across his face. Rebecca used to say I had two settings, silent and asleep. She did most of the talking for both of us. It was the first time he'd spoken his late wife's name without his voice fracturing. Progress, maybe. Emma appeared at Lydia's elbow, the rag doll clutched tight. She studied Caleb with solemn eyes, then held out the doll. She's cold too. She needs to warm up by the fire. Caleb stared at the offered doll, and Lydia saw the moment the walls started to crumble. His face went through a series of rapid changes, pain, resistance, something that looked like surrender. Then slowly he reached out and took the doll with his thawing hands. What's her name? His voice was rough. I don't know yet. What was your little girl going to be named? The question was innocent, guileless, but it hit like a physical blow. Caleb's breath caught, and for a terrible moment Lydia thought he might shatter completely. Rose, he whispered. We were going to call her Rose. That's a pretty name. Can this doll be Rose? Caleb looked down at the worn toy in his hands, the toy he'd made for a daughter who never drew breath, packed away in a closet because he couldn't bear to see it. His throat worked, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Yes, she can be Rose. Emma beamed and climbed onto the bench beside him, retrieving her doll and settling in like she belonged there. Caleb sat rigid, clearly uncomfortable with the proximity, but he didn't move away. Thomas watched from across the room, his expression carefully neutral, but Lydia saw the hunger in his eyes, the need for connection, for approval, for something that resembled family. The wind howled outside and snow continued to pile against the windows, but inside the small circle of firelight, something had shifted. Not healed, wounds this deep didn't heal in a day, but acknowledged, brought into the light where they could be examined instead of hidden in darkness. Tell me about the horse, Lydia said, sensing Caleb needed the conversation steered to safer ground. The one in the barn. He latched onto the topic with visible relief. Sagebrush. She's a quarter horse, good bloodlines, strong build. I bought her as a yearling with the last of my savings, bred her to a stallion 2 counties over. She's due to foal this spring. Is that why she was spooked? Pregnancy makes creatures unpredictable. Partly. But mostly it's just the storm. Animals can sense pressure changes, makes them nervous. How many horses do you have? 6 now, 4 working horses, Sagebrush, and a gelding that's too old for hard work but good with children. He glanced at Thomas. If you want to learn to ride, Dusty's the one to start with. Thomas's face lit up. Really? Once the weather clears, if your mother approves. All eyes turned to Lydia. She thought of the dangers, falls, kicks, broken bones, and then thought of the light in her son's face. I approve, on the condition that you follow Mr. Turner's instructions exactly. I will, Mama. I promise. The conversation continued, stilted at first, but gradually finding rhythm. Caleb explained the basics of ranch management, the breeding cycle, market timing, predator control. Thomas asked questions with the intensity of a scholar, absorbing every detail. Emma eventually dozed against Caleb's side, still clutching Rose, and he let her sleep there without protest. Lydia prepared an early supper, listening to the low rumble of Caleb's voice mixed with Thomas's eager questions. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was less cold than before. They ate together without the oppressive silence that had marked previous meals. Caleb even complimented the food, and though the words were gruff and economical, they were genuine. After supper, Thomas asked if Caleb knew how to play chess. To everyone's surprise, he did. They set up the board at the table while Lydia cleaned the kitchen and Emma played with Rose by the fire. The first game was quiet, both players focused. The second game, Thomas started asking about strategy, and Caleb answered with the patience of a natural teacher. You're thinking too many moves ahead, Caleb said, studying the board. That's good instinct, but you have to balance planning with reacting to what's actually happening. Your opponent won't always do what you expect. Papa used to say the same thing. Thomas moved his knight. He wasn't very good at chess, but he liked playing. Caleb nodded slowly. What else did your papa like? The question opened a door Thomas had been waiting for someone to knock on. He talked about Samuel, the painting, the stories, the way he could make ordinary things seem magical. He didn't gloss over the hard parts either, the sickness and the fear and the end. Caleb listened without interruption, and when Thomas finally fell silent, he said simply, "He sounds like he loved you very much." He did. Thomas's voice was steady. But he's gone now, and we're here. Yes, you are. It wasn't acceptance, not quite, but it was acknowledgement. A recognition that they existed, that they mattered, that they were more than temporary inconveniences to be endured. The storm raged on through the night, but inside the house, something had begun to thaw. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Caleb woke before sunrise and checked the chimney, finding the blockage cleared by the wind. The fire drew properly again, and the house warmed quickly. He made coffee in silence, then stood at the window watching the sun rise over a transformed landscape. Snow had sculpted the ranch into something alien and beautiful, drifts reaching the eaves of the outbuildings, the fence lines buried under white. Lydia came downstairs to find him there, his expression unreadable. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It's a mess. Clearing the paths alone will take days." "Then we'll help. Thomas is strong, and I'm no stranger to hard work." He glanced at her. "You ever handled a snow shovel?" There's a first time for everything. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "All right, but we start slow. I don't need anyone getting frostbite or injured." They worked together through the morning, Caleb breaking trail, Thomas following to widen the path, Lydia clearing the porch and steps. Emma stayed inside with strict instructions to keep the fire fed and watch for anyone in trouble. The work was brutal. Lydia's back screamed, her hands blistered inside her gloves, and her lungs burned from the frigid air. But there was satisfaction in it too. In the visible progress, the path growing longer, the ranch emerging from its white burial. At midday, they broke for food and warmth. Lydia made hot soup and bread, and they ate like laborers, too hungry for conversation. Then, back out into the cold, attacking the path to the barn. By the time they reached it, the sun was lowering, and all three were exhausted. Caleb checked the stock while Lydia and Thomas rested. The animals were fine, cold but healthy, their water troughs thawed by heat from their bodies. Walking back to the house in the gathering dusk, Caleb spoke without preamble. "You did good work today, both of you." Thomas practically glowed. Lydia felt her own chest warm at the simple praise. "We're a family now," she said carefully. "Families work together." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm not used to family." "Neither are we. Not this kind anyway. But we're all we've got, so we might as well figure it out." He nodded slowly, and they continued in companionable silence. That night, after the children were asleep, Lydia found Caleb in the main room, staring into the fire. She almost retreated, unwilling to disturb his solitude, but something made her stay. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Not yet." She settled into the chair across from him, watching the flames dance. "Thank you for today, for letting Thomas work beside you. He's a good kid, works hard, doesn't complain. He's looking for a father. I want you to know that so you understand what's happening. He loved Samuel, but he was so young when we lost him. The memory's fading. He needs someone to look up to." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I can't be his father." "I'm not asking you to replace anyone. Just don't shut him out." "He's had enough loss." "So have I." "I know. But you're an adult. You have coping mechanisms, survival strategies. Thomas is 9. All he knows is that the world keeps taking things from him, and he's trying to hold on to whatever stability he can find." Caleb stared into the fire, his expression troubled. "What if I fail him?" "You will, probably multiple times, but that's what people do. They fail and try again. As long as you keep trying, that's enough." He turned to look at her directly for the first time. "Is it? Enough for you, I mean?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "You came here expecting partnership, practical arrangement, no romance. But you're getting less than that, aren't you? A man who barely speaks, who keeps you at arm's length, who can't even look at your daughter without seeing ghosts. Lydia measured her words carefully. I came here expecting honesty. You've given me that, even when it's uncomfortable. I came expecting stability. This ranch provides that if we can make it work. I came expecting hard work, and there's certainly no shortage of that. She paused. Romance would be nice, I suppose, but I've had romance. What I need now is partnership, and we're building toward that, slowly, painfully, but building nonetheless. You deserve better. Better than what? A warm house, food on the table, meaningful work, and someone who's trying despite his fear? I've had worse, Caleb. Much worse. He shook his head slowly. I don't understand you. You could have stayed in Philadelphia, found another solution. There was no other solution. This was survival. I chose you because your letters were honest, because you didn't promise things you couldn't deliver, because you needed what I could offer, and I needed what you had. It was practical, sensible, and it's working, even if you can't see it yet. How is this working? I can barely stand to be in the same room with you sometimes. The words should have hurt, but his tone robbed them of venom. He sounded genuinely confused, as if his own reactions baffled him. That's grief talking, not you, Lydia said gently. You're afraid that if you let us in, we'll be taken away like Rebecca and Rose were, so you keep us at a distance, thinking that will protect you. But it won't. All it does is make you lonelier. Maybe lonely is safer. Maybe. But it's no way to live. He had no answer for that. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Caleb rose. I should check the stock one more time before bed. It's late. Can it wait until morning? Probably, but I need... He gestured vaguely. I need air. She understood. The conversation had pushed too deep, touched too many raw places. He needed distance to process it. Don't stay out too long. It's below zero. I won't. He left, and Lydia remained by the dying fire, wondering if progress always felt this much like failure. He came back an hour later, his face wind-burned and his eyes distant, and went straight to his room without a word. Lydia listened to his footsteps overhead, the creak of floorboards as he paced, the eventual silence that suggested sleep, or at least the pretense of it. She waited a while longer before climbing the stairs herself, pausing outside the children's room to check on them. Thomas and Emma slept peacefully, their breathing deep and even, and she felt the familiar surge of protective love that made every sacrifice worthwhile. In her own room, Rebecca's room, she still thought of it, she prepared for bed with mechanical efficiency. The space still felt borrowed, filled with another woman's choices. The curtains Rebecca had sewn, the quilt Rebecca had pieced together, the pressed flowers in the frame on the wall, picked by hands long cold. Lydia climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere down the hall, Caleb was doing the same, locked in his own battle with ghosts she couldn't fight for him. The days that followed fell into a new pattern, one marked by small advances and stubborn retreats. Caleb would open up fractionally, sharing some memory or piece of himself, then withdraw as if regretting the intimacy. He taught Thomas to curry horses and mend tack, his instructions patient and thorough, but when Emma asked to help, he found reasons to send her away. Lydia watched this dance with growing frustration. She understood his pain, but understanding didn't make it easier to witness the hurt in her daughter's eyes every time Caleb turned away from her. One afternoon, while Caleb and Thomas worked in the barn, Lydia found Emma crying quietly in the bedroom. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Mr. Turner doesn't like me." Lydia's heart clenched. "That's not true." "Yes, it is. He likes Thomas. He talks to Thomas and teaches him things. But when I'm there, he leaves." "It's complicated, Emma. It has nothing to do with you." "Then what's wrong with me?" The question broke something in Lydia's chest. She pulled Emma into her lap and held her tight, struggling for words that would make sense to a 6-year-old. "Mr. Turner had a little girl who died before she was born. You remind him of her and it makes him sad. He's not avoiding you because of something you did wrong. He's avoiding the sadness." "But I'm not her. I'm me." "I know, baby. And he knows that too in his head. But his heart is having a harder time understanding." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. "Will he ever stop being sad?" "I don't know. Maybe, but it takes time and we have to be patient." I don't want to make him sad. You don't make him sad, Emma. The loss makes him sad. You just remind him of what he lost, and that's not your fault. But Emma's small face remained troubled, and Lydia knew the explanation wasn't enough. Children needed concrete things, actions, not abstractions. And Caleb's continued rejection, however understandable, was slowly eroding her daughter's confidence. That evening, after the children were asleep, Lydia confronted him. She found him in the main room reviewing ledgers by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, wariness flickering across his face. "We need to talk about Emma." His expression shuddered immediately. "What about her?" "You're hurting her. Every time you turn away, every time you find an excuse to avoid her, she feels it." "I'm not trying to hurt anyone." "I know that, but intent doesn't matter when the result is the same. She's 6 years old, Caleb. She doesn't understand why the man who's kind to her brother treats her like a burden." He set down his pen with deliberate care. "What do you want me to do?" "Acknowledge her existence. Speak to her directly instead of through me. Let her help with small tasks, the way you let Thomas help. She's not asking for much, just to be seen." "I see her." "No, you look at her and see a ghost." "That's not the same thing." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're asking." "Don't I?" Lydia moved closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "You think I don't understand grief? I watched my husband die by inches. I held his hand while he coughed blood into a rag and apologized for leaving us. I buried him in a pauper's grave because I couldn't afford anything better. And I went home to 2 children who needed me to be strong when I wanted to curl up and die. So don't tell me I don't understand what I'm asking." Caleb's face had gone pale. "That's different." "How? Because your loss was sudden and mine was slow? Because you lost potential while I lost reality?" "Loss is loss, Caleb, and using it as an excuse to hurt a child is cowardice." The word hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You have no right." "I have every right. I'm her mother, and I won't stand by while you break her heart through indifference. If you can't manage kindness, at least manage civility." "I am civil. Barely. And that's not enough for a child living in your house, bearing your name." She took a breath, forcing herself to speak more calmly. "I'm not asking you to love her, Caleb. I'm asking you to try. To see her as herself instead of a painful reminder. To give her the same chance you're giving Thomas." He turned away, his hands braced on the mantel, his shoulders rigid. "You don't understand. When I look at her—" His voice cracked, and he stopped. Lydia waited, giving him space to find the words. "Rose would have been about her age now," he said finally. "Same dark hair, probably. Rebecca's eyes. Every time I see Emma, I see what I lost. What I'll never have. And it's like being gutted all over again." The raw pain in his voice made Lydia's anger soften, but she didn't retreat. "I know. But Emma isn't responsible for your loss, and she shouldn't pay the price for it. She's already lost her father. Don't make her feel like she's losing you too before she ever had you." "I never asked to be her father. You asked us to come here. You knew I had children. You made promises in those letters, Caleb. Promises about treating them as your own. If you can't keep those promises, then tell me now so I can make other arrangements." He spun to face her. "What other arrangements? You said yourself there's nowhere else to go." "Then I'll find somewhere. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to. I'll take charity. I'll do whatever it takes. But I won't watch my daughter wither under rejection from someone who claims to want a family." They stared at each other, the ultimatum hanging heavy between them. Lydia's heart pounded, but she kept her chin high, refusing to back down. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, to defend himself, to push back against the demand she was making. But something in her expression must have convinced him she meant every word. "I don't know how," he said finally, his voice rough. "I don't know how to be around her without it hurting." "Then you figure it out, because the alternative is us leaving, and I don't think either of us wants that." The silence stretched taut. Then Caleb nodded once, jerky and reluctant. "I'll try. That's all I'm asking." He returned to his chair but didn't pick up his pen. Lydia remained standing, uncertain whether to leave or press the advantage. "Tell me about Rebecca," she said instead. He looked up, surprised. "Why?" Because she's a presence in this house whether we acknowledge her or not. And maybe if you talk about her, really talk about her, she'll stop being a ghost and become a memory instead. Caleb's hands curled into fists on the desk. I've never talked about her. Not to anyone. Maybe it's time you did. For a long moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, slowly, he began to speak. We met at a church social. I was 24, new to the territory, trying to build a ranch from nothing. She was the school teacher's daughter, educated, proper, completely out of my league. I couldn't imagine why she'd look twice at someone like me. His voice was halting at first, but gradually smoothed as the memories took hold. She was stubborn, opinionated. She had ideas about everything, how the house should be arranged, what crops to plant, which cattle to breed. Half the time I thought she was crazy. The other half I realized she was right. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She wanted children immediately. Couldn't wait to fill the house with noise and chaos. We tried for 2 years before she finally got pregnant. The smile faded. She was so happy. Spent months sewing tiny clothes, preparing the nursery, talking to her belly like the baby could already hear her. The midwife said everything was fine. Normal pregnancy, healthy mother, no warning at all. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The labor went on for 2 days. The midwife finally sent for the doctor, but by the time he arrived, it was too late. Something went wrong, the cord maybe, or the position. The baby was already gone, and Rebecca was bleeding too much to stop. She lasted maybe an hour after, long enough to know, long enough to ask me to bury them together. Tears tracked down his face, unnoticed or ignored. Lydia felt her own eyes burning but blinked them back, knowing he needed her strength right now, not her sympathy. I built the coffin myself, Caleb continued, lined it with the quilt she'd made for the baby. Buried them on the hill overlooking the valley because Rebecca loved watching the sunrise from there. Then I came back to this house and tried to figure out how to keep breathing. He fell silent, lost in memories that still had the power to destroy him. She sounds remarkable, Lydia said softly. She was. And I failed her. I couldn't save her, couldn't save our daughter, couldn't do anything but watch them slip away. That's not failure, that's tragedy. There's a difference. Is there? He looked at her with eyes full of old pain. Because from where I stand, the result is the same. They're gone, and I'm here, and nothing I do will change that. No, nothing will change what happened. But you can choose what happens next. You can let the grief consume you, or you can honor their memory by living the life they wanted for you. How do you know what they wanted? Because Rebecca spent 9 months preparing for a house full of children, and now you have 2 children under your roof, alive and needing you, and you're pushing them away because they're not the child you lost. Do you really think that's what she would have wanted? The question hit like a physical blow. Caleb's face crumpled, and for a terrible moment Lydia thought she'd gone too far. Then he buried his face in his hands and wept with the harsh, tearing sobs of a man who had held grief inside too long. She moved to him without thinking, placing a hand on his shoulder. He flinched at the contact, then leaned into it, and she found herself holding this large, broken man while he cried for everything he'd lost. They stayed that way for a long time, Lydia offering comfort she wasn't sure he wanted, Caleb accepting it with the desperation of someone drowning. When the storm finally passed, he pulled away, wiping his face roughly with his sleeve. "I'm sorry. That was human," Lydia interrupted. "That was human. And long overdue, I suspect." He laughed, a broken sound that held no humor. "Rebecca used to say I kept everything bottled up until it exploded. Guess she was right about that, too." "She sounds like she knew you well." "Better than I knew myself sometimes." He stood, moving to the window and staring out at the darkness. "I loved her so much it scared me. And when I lost her, I swore I'd never let myself feel that way again. Never give anyone that kind of power to destroy me." "Is that why you wrote those letters? Seeking partnership instead of love?" "Yes. I thought if I could keep it practical, businesslike, I'd be safe. But then you showed up with your children, and you're not businesslike at all. You're real and complicated and stubborn, and Thomas looks at me like I hung the moon, and Emma just wants someone to see her, and I don't know how to do this without it terrifying me." Lydia crossed to stand beside him, close but not touching. "You do it the same way I do. One day at a time, one small step forward, even when it feels impossible. You try, you fail, you try again. That's what survival looks like." "What if I can't? What if I keep hurting them? Then you apologize and do better tomorrow. Children are remarkably forgiving if you're honest with them. He turned to look at her, really look at her, and something shifted in his expression. You're stronger than I am. I've had more practice and different stakes. I had to survive for them. You only had to survive for yourself, which is both easier and harder. I'm not sure I have been surviving, more like existing. Then maybe it's time to start living again. The words hung between them, both challenge and invitation. Caleb held her gaze for a long moment, and Lydia felt something spark in the space between them. Not romance, not quite, but recognition. The acknowledgement that they were in this together, for better or worse. I'll talk to Emma tomorrow, he said finally. Really talk to her. I can't promise it won't be awkward, but I'll try. That's all I'm asking. He nodded, then hesitated. Thank you for pushing, for not letting me hide. That's what partners do. The words seemed to settle something between them. Not love, not yet, maybe not ever. But partnership. Honest, hard-fought, earned through conflict and compromise. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Lydia woke to find Caleb already downstairs. And when she descended, she found him sitting at the table with Emma, the two of them having what appeared to be an actual conversation. Emma was showing him her doll, Rose, and explaining the elaborate stories she'd created. Caleb listened with an attention that seemed to cost him dearly, but he was present, focused, asking questions that made Emma's face light up. Lydia paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. Thomas appeared beside her, and together they watched the tentative bridge being built across the Gulf of Grief. He's trying, Thomas whispered. Yes? He is. Do you think it'll work? Us being a family? Lydia considered the question honestly. I don't know, but I think we have a chance, and sometimes that's all you need. Caleb looked up and saw them watching. Something like embarrassment crossed his face, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he gestured to the table. Emma was telling me about Rose's adventures. Apparently, she's quite the traveler. Emma nodded enthusiastically. She's been to Philadelphia and Montana and lots of places in between, and now she lives on a ranch with horses and cows and a grumpy man who's learning to smile. The description was so innocently pointed that Lydia had to suppress a smile. Caleb's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Grumpy, is he? Very grumpy, but Rose thinks he's secretly nice. He just forgot how to show it. Rose sounds very wise. She is. She knows lots of things. Caleb met Lydia's eyes across the room, and she saw the effort it was costing him to maintain the conversation, to stay present instead of fleeing. But he was doing it, actually trying. She busied herself with breakfast, giving them space, listening to Emma's chatter and Caleb's measured responses. It wasn't natural yet, wasn't easy, but it was happening. Progress. After breakfast, Caleb announced he needed to ride out to check the far pasture where some of the cattle had drifted during the storm. Thomas immediately volunteered to go, and to everyone's surprise, Caleb agreed. You'll ride Dusty. Stay close and follow my instructions exactly. Understood? Yes, sir. They saddled up while Lydia watched from the porch, her heart in her throat. Thomas looked so small on the broad-backed gelding, but his face shone with pride and determination. Caleb swung onto his own horse with practiced ease, then looked down at Emma, who had followed them to the barn. You want to help too? Emma's eyes went wide. Me? Someone needs to make sure the chickens are fed and the eggs collected. Think you can handle that? Yes, I can do that. Your mother will show you how. It's important work. We need those eggs for breakfast. He said it seriously, without condescension, treating her contribution as genuinely valuable. Emma practically vibrated with excitement. Caleb met Lydia's eyes, and she gave him a small nod of approval. He nodded back, then urged his horse forward, Thomas following close behind. Lydia watched them ride out across the snow-covered valley, man and boy, side by side, and felt something loosen in her chest. This was what family could look like. Imperfect, struggling, but reaching toward each other despite the fear. She took Emma's hand and led her to the chicken coop, showing her how to scatter feed and check the nesting boxes for eggs. Emma approached the task with solemn concentration, and when she emerged with 3 eggs carefully cradled in her basket, she beamed with accomplishment. I did it, Mama. I got eggs. You did wonderfully, sweetheart. Mr. Turner said it was important work. It is. We all have important work here. We all matter. Emma processed this, then asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. Does Mr. Turner think I matter? Lydia knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. He's learning to. It's hard for him because of sad things that happened before we came. But he's trying, Emma. You saw that this morning. He talked to me about Rose. He did. That was brave of him. Why was it brave? Because sometimes talking about things that make us sad is the bravest thing we can do. Emma nodded slowly, then brightened. Maybe if I keep talking to him, he'll get less sad. Maybe. But remember, his sadness isn't your responsibility to fix. You just be yourself and let him figure out the rest. They spent the morning working through household tasks, falling into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Lydia baked bread while Emma played nearby, the warmth and yeast smell filling the kitchen with a sense of home that had been missing. Around midday, Caleb and Thomas returned, both windburned and satisfied. Thomas couldn't stop talking about the ride, the cattle they'd found, the way the mountains looked from the high pasture. Caleb listened with what might have been amusement, then turned to Emma. Did you take care of the chickens? Yes, sir. I got 3 eggs. Good work. We'll need those for supper. The simple praise made Emma glow, and Lydia felt a surge of gratitude toward this difficult man who was trying so hard to overcome his demons. They ate lunch together, the conversation more natural than it had been before. Caleb told stories about the ranch, winter challenges, encounters with predators, the year a late spring snow had nearly wiped out the calf crop. He didn't smile much, but his voice lost some of its harsh edge, and when Thomas asked questions, he answered with patience. After lunch, while the children played by the fire, Caleb pulled Lydia aside. I need to ride to town tomorrow. Supplies are running low, and I need to check on a tool order. I thought, if you want, you could come, see the town, meet some people. The offer surprised her. What about the children? Sam and Pete can watch them for a few hours. They're rough, but they're good men. The kids will be safe. Lydia hesitated. She hadn't been apart from her children since Samuel died, hadn't trusted them to anyone's care but her own. I know it's hard, Caleb said quietly, but they need to learn the ranch, and you need to know you can trust my men. We can't build a life here if you're afraid to let them out of your sight. He was right, much as she hated to admit it. All right, but only for a few hours. That's all it'll take. Town's small. We'll be back before dark. The next morning, Lydia dressed with care, wanting to make a good impression. She had only one decent dress, and it was worn thin at the seams, but she brushed it clean and pinned her hair with the few pins she owned. Caleb introduced her to Sam and Pete, both older ranch hands with weather-beaten faces and kind eyes. They treated the children with gruff gentleness, and Thomas was thrilled at the prospect of learning more about ranch work from real cowboys. The ride to town took nearly 2 hours across frozen roads. Caleb kept the horses to a steady pace, and they traveled mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Pine Ridge was smaller than Lydia expected. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of houses. But it was civilization, and after weeks of isolation, even this small town felt like a metropolis. Caleb helped her down from the wagon and gestured to the general store. Sarah Mitchell runs that. She's fair and doesn't gossip much. You can browse while I handle the tool order. Lydia entered the store to find a woman in her 50s arranging canned goods on shelves. Sarah Mitchell had steel gray hair, sharp eyes, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd survived frontier life through sheer competence. Help you? She asked, then stopped, her eyes narrowing. You're new. Lydia Harper. I'm Caleb Turner's mail-order bride. Word travels, even in winter. Sarah's expression wasn't unkind, just assessing. Didn't think he'd actually go through with it. Neither did he, for a while. Sarah's lips quirked. Honest, I like that. What do you need? Just looking around, getting familiar with the town. Not much to get familiar with. You got questions? Ask. I know everyone's business whether they want me to or not. They talked while Lydia browsed, Sarah sharing information about the town, the people, the rhythms of frontier life. The doctor, the preacher, the families who'd been here for generations, and the newcomers trying to carve out a place. Caleb's had a hard time, Sarah said eventually. Losing Rebecca like that? It broke something in him. Folks worried he'd never come out of it. He's trying. Is he? Sarah's gaze was shrewd. Or are you just hoping he will? Lydia met her eyes directly. Both. Sarah nodded slowly. That's honest too. You're going to need that honesty. Winter out here is long and lonely, and if you can't be straight with each other, you won't make it. We'll make it. You sound certain. I have to be. There's no other option. Sarah studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile, warm and approving. You'll do. Come by any time. Company's scarce in winter, and I get tired of talking to myself. Caleb appeared at the doorway, his tool order handled. Ready? Lydia nodded, and they prepared to leave. But as they climbed into the wagon, Sarah called out, Caleb Turner, you bring that family to church on Sunday. Time people met your wife proper. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Yes, ma'am. On the ride home, Lydia asked, Do you go to church regularly? Not since Rebecca died. But Sarah's right. People will want to meet you, and it's good for the children to have community. You don't have to go for my sake. I know, but I should anyway. Rebecca would have wanted it. It was the first time he'd invoked his late wife's wishes, not as a barrier, but as a guide forward. Lydia felt the significance of it and chose not to comment, letting the moment stand on its own. They arrived home to find the children safe and happy, full of stories about helping Sam and Pete with various tasks. Emma had learned to milk a cow, though most of the milk had ended up on her dress. Thomas had helped mend a fence and been praised for his steady hands. That night, as they gathered for supper, Lydia looked around the table, at Thomas and Emma, animated and secure, at Caleb listening to their chatter with something almost like contentment, and felt the fragile beginnings of something that might, eventually, become home. Sunday arrived with brilliant sunshine that turned the snow into a field of diamonds. Lydia woke early and pressed the children's clothes with an iron heated on the stove, determined they would look presentable despite their limited wardrobe. She wore her one good dress again, the same she'd worn to town, and twisted her hair into a style that suggested respectability, if not prosperity. Caleb emerged from his room in a dark suit she hadn't seen before, clean-shaven for the first time since she'd arrived. The transformation startled her. Without the beard, he looked younger, more vulnerable, and she could see the resemblance to the man Rebecca must have fallen in love with. He caught her staring, and his hand went to his jaw self-consciously. Too much? No. You look... She caught herself before saying handsome. Presentable. Something flickered in his eyes that might have been amusement. High praise. The ride to town was longer with all four of them crowded into the wagon, but the children were too excited to complain. Emma wore her best pinafore and had insisted on bringing Rose, who sat primly in her lap. Thomas had slicked his hair back with water until it lay flat against his skull, and he kept tugging at his collar like it was strangling him. Stop fidgeting, Lydia whispered. You look fine. It's tight. You'll survive. The church was a simple white building with a bell tower that rang out across the valley as they approached. Other wagons and riders were already gathering, families in their Sunday best exchanging greetings and gossip. Lydia felt a wave of nerves as Caleb helped her down. These people would be judging her, measuring her against Rebecca's memory, deciding whether she was worthy of a place in their community. Sarah Mitchell appeared almost immediately, resplendent in a purple dress that suggested she'd once lived somewhere more cosmopolitan. There you are. I was beginning to think you'd chickened out. We're here, Caleb said flatly. So I see. And these must be the children. Sarah smiled at Thomas and Emma with genuine warmth. Handsome pair. You look like your mother, boy. And you, little one, those are Rebecca's eyes if I ever saw them. Lydia tensed, waiting for Caleb's reaction, but he simply nodded. Emma, Thomas, this is Mrs. Mitchell. She runs the general store. Pleased to meet you, ma'am, Thomas said with careful politeness. Emma just stared, clutching Rose tighter. Shy one, is she? Sarah's smile didn't fade. That's all right. Plenty of children here for you to play with once you warm up. Come on, let's get you introduced before service starts. She swept them into the crowd with the confidence of a general marshaling troops. Lydia found herself shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with more people than she could possibly remember. The doctor, the preacher, various ranchers and their wives, the school teacher who immediately took an interest in Thomas's education. Most were kind, if reserved. A few were openly curious, their eyes taking in every detail of her worn dress and patched gloves. One woman, Mrs. Thornton, the banker's wife, looked down her nose and sniffed audibly before turning away without speaking. "Don't mind Helen," Sarah whispered. "She's got more money than sense and thinks it makes her better than everyone else. Most folks see right through her." But the snub stung nonetheless, a reminder that Lydia was an outsider, someone who'd have to prove her worth. Caleb stayed close, his presence a solid wall at her back. He didn't say much, but when people addressed him, he introduced Lydia as his wife without hesitation or qualification. The simple claim of ownership, not possessive but protective, steadied her nerves. They filed into the church and found seats near the back. The service was traditional, the preacher's sermon about perseverance through hardship. Lydia found her mind wandering, taking in the details of the building. The simple cross above the altar, the worn hymnals in the pews, the way light streamed through the plain glass windows and painted the congregation in shades of gold. Beside her, Caleb sat rigid, his hymnal unopened, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. This was costing him, she realized, being here, in the place where he'd undoubtedly sat beside Rebecca, where he'd probably planned to bring his daughter for baptism. Every pew, every prayer, every note of music was a reminder of what he'd lost. She reached over and placed her hand on his, a simple gesture of support. He startled, looked down at their joined hands, then slowly turned his palm up and laced his fingers through hers. They sat that way through the rest of the service, connected by that single point of contact, and Lydia felt something shift between them. Not love, not yet, but the recognition that they were no longer fighting separate battles. Whatever came next, they would face it together. After the service, the congregation lingered outside, reluctant to surrender the sunshine and company. Children ran shrieking between the wagons while adults clustered in conversation groups. Emma found a girl about her age and was soon absorbed in some elaborate game involving sticks and imagination. Thomas gravitated toward a group of older boys who were discussing horses with the seriousness of seasoned traders. Lydia stood with a group of women who peppered her with questions disguised as friendly conversation. Where had she come from? How had she met Caleb? What did she think of Montana? Did she know how to preserve vegetables, make soap, deliver a calf? She answered as honestly as she could without revealing too much desperation. Philadelphia. Through correspondence. Montana was beautiful, if harsh. She could learn whatever needed learning. You'll need to, one woman said, not unkindly. Life out here isn't easy for city women. We lose more than we keep. I'm not most women, Lydia replied, keeping her voice pleasant but firm. The woman, Mrs. Chen, wife of one of the Chinese railroad workers who'd stayed after the line was completed, smiled with approval. No, I don't think you are. Across the yard, Caleb stood with a group of ranchers discussing cattle prices and weather predictions. Lydia watched him deflect questions about his personal life with the skill of long practice, steering conversations back to safe, practical topics. But then a man broke away from another group and approached Caleb with the determined stride of someone on a mission. He was tall and well-dressed, with sandy hair and the kind of easy confidence that came from inherited wealth. Turner, didn't expect to see you here. Caleb's posture went rigid. Thornton. So this was Helen Thornton's husband. Lydia felt her protective instincts rise. Heard you took yourself a wife. From back east, they say. Thornton's eyes found Lydia across the yard and his smile turned calculating. Didn't waste much time replacing Rebecca, did you? The words fell like stones into the conversation around them. Several people gasped. Sarah Mitchell's eyes narrowed dangerously. Caleb's hand curled into a fist, but his voice stayed level. Careful, Thornton. Just making an observation. Though I have to wonder what kind of woman answers an advertisement for a dead woman's position. Desperate, probably. Or worse. The insult hung in the air, and Lydia felt every eye turned toward her. Her face burned, but she kept her chin high, refusing to give Thornton the satisfaction of seeing her shame. Caleb took a step toward Thornton, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. You will apologize to my wife. Now. Or what? You'll hit me? In front of the whole congregation? Thornton's smile widened. That would be quite the show. James Thornton, you shut your mouth right now. Sarah Mitchell had appeared like an avenging angel, her face flushed with righteous anger. How dare you speak to a lady that way? And on church grounds, no less. I'm simply stating facts, Mrs. Mitchell. Turner here couldn't keep one wife alive, and now he's imported another. Makes a man wonder about his judgment. The crack of Lydia's palm across Thornton's face echoed across the suddenly silent churchyard. She had moved without thinking, pure instinct overriding caution, and now stood with her hand still raised and her chest heaving. My husband's judgment, she said, her voice shaking with fury, is none of your concern. And if you ever speak about Rebecca Turner that way again, suggesting her death was somehow his fault, I will do far worse than slap you. Do I make myself clear? Thornton's face had gone white except for the red handprint blooming on his cheek. He opened his mouth, closed it, then spun on his heel and stalked toward his wagon. Helen Thornton hurried after him, shooting venomous looks over her shoulder. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, Sarah Mitchell began to clap. Others joined in, and soon half the congregation was applauding while the other half looked scandalized. The preacher appeared, his face troubled. Mrs. Turner, I understand your anger, but violence was entirely justified, Sarah interrupted. James Thornton has needed someone to put him in his place for years. Good for her. But the damage was done. Lydia could see it in the faces around her, some approving, some shocked, all reassessing. She had made an impression, certainly, but not the one she'd intended. Caleb's hand found the small of her back, steady and grounding. We should go. They gathered the children quickly and loaded into the wagon. Thomas looked excited by the drama, but Emma seemed frightened by the raised voices and tension. As they pulled away, Lydia could feel eyes boring into her back. I'm sorry, she said once they were on the road. I shouldn't have struck him. I've probably embarrassed you in front of the whole town. You defended Rebecca's memory and your own honor. Nothing to apologize for. But now everyone will think, let them think what they want. Thornton's been looking for a fight with me since Rebecca died. He made an offer to buy the ranch last year and I refused. He's been nursing that grudge ever since. He said terrible things about you. He did, and you shut him up faster than I could have. There was something almost like pride in his voice. Rebecca would have liked you. The words caught Lydia completely off guard. What? She had a temper too. Hit it most of the time. But when someone crossed a line, she let them know it. You remind me of her in that way. It was perhaps the highest compliment he could have paid her, and Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back and stared at the road ahead, afraid to break the moment with speech. They rode in silence for a while. Then Thomas spoke up from the back of the wagon. Mama, did you really slap that man? Yes, sweetheart. Good, he deserved it. Even Caleb smiled at that. But as they approached the ranch, Lydia's mind was already working through the consequences. She had made an enemy of the town's banker and his wife, had scandalized the more conservative congregation members, and had announced her presence in the most dramatic way possible. Whatever hopes she'd had of sliding quietly into the community were gone. The following days were tense. Caleb worked with single-minded intensity, throwing himself into ranch tasks as if physical exhaustion could quiet whatever thoughts plagued him. Thomas shadowed him faithfully, and Caleb seemed to find comfort in teaching the boy, explaining techniques and sharing knowledge with a patience he couldn't quite extend to emotional conversations. Emma had become Lydia's constant shadow, helping with household tasks and chattering about everything and nothing. But at night, Lydia would find her daughter crying quietly into her pillow, overwhelmed by all the changes and the lingering fear that this home too might be taken away. What if Mr. Turner decides he doesn't want us again? Emma whispered one night. He won't, Lydia said with more confidence than she felt. But what if he does? What if we have to leave? Then we'll figure it out. We always do. But Emma, listen to me. Mr. Turner is trying. He's not going to send us away. Promise? Lydia wanted to promise, wanted to offer certainty in an uncertain world, but she'd learned the hard way that promises were fragile things, easily broken by circumstances beyond anyone's control. I promise I'll do everything in my power to keep us together, she said instead. That's the best I can offer. It seemed to be enough. Emma fell asleep with Rose clutched tight, and Lydia sat watching her daughter's peaceful face and praying to whatever forces governed the universe that she could keep that promise. The next morning, Caleb announced he needed to ride out to the line shack in the upper pasture to check on some cattle that had drifted into the high country. It would take most of the day, possibly into the evening. "Take Thomas with you," Lydia suggested. "He needs the experience, and the ride will do him good." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but we'll need to leave early and pack supplies in case we get caught out." They departed before dawn, their saddlebags loaded with food and emergency gear. Lydia stood on the porch watching them ride out, Thomas sitting tall in the saddle, trying to match Caleb's easy posture. She spent the day working through household tasks with Emma's help, but her mind kept drifting to the two riders in the high country. The sky was clear when they left, but Montana weather could turn vicious without warning, and the thought of Thomas caught in a sudden storm made her chest tight with anxiety. By late afternoon, clouds had begun massing over the mountains, and the temperature dropped sharply. Lydia brought in extra wood and prepared a large pot of stew, telling herself she was just being practical, not worried. Darkness fell without their return. She fed Emma and tried to maintain calm, but her daughter picked up on her tension. "Are they all right, Mama?" "I'm sure they are. They probably just found more work than expected." But as the hours crawled past and the wind picked up, rattling the windows with increasing force, Lydia's worry deepened into fear. She tried to remember Caleb's words about the line shack, about emergency supplies, about his experience in these mountains. He knew what he was doing. He would keep Thomas safe. She had to believe that. Around 9 o'clock, she heard hoofbeats in the yard. She rushed to the door and flung it open to find Caleb dismounting, but Thomas's saddle was empty. Her heart stopped. "Where's Thomas?" "He's fine." Caleb's voice was rough with exhaustion. "He's at the line shack. Storm came up faster than I expected, and the trail down is too dangerous in the dark. We'll ride back at first light." "You left my son alone in the mountains during a storm?" "He's not alone. Sam's up there with the herd, and the shack is solid, stocked with supplies. He's safer there than trying to navigate that trail in the dark." Logically, Lydia knew he was right. Emotionally, every instinct screamed at her to saddle a horse and ride out immediately. "He must be terrified." "He's calm, calmer than you are right now." Caleb stepped onto the porch, his face drawn with fatigue. "I wouldn't have left him if there was any danger. You have to trust that." "You trust you with my son's life?" "Yes." The single word hung between them, both challenge and plea. Lydia wanted to rage at him, to demand he go back right now, to not rely on trust she wasn't sure she had. But she looked into his eyes and saw not carelessness, but certainty. He believed Thomas was safe, and if she couldn't trust him in this, what was the point of any of it? "All right," she said, though the words cost her. "But we leave at first light, not a minute later." Agreed. He came inside, bringing cold air and the smell of horse and leather. Emma appeared in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Where's Thomas?" "He's having an adventure," Caleb said before Lydia could answer. "Camping in the mountains with Sam. He'll have stories to tell tomorrow." Emma accepted this without question and padded back to bed. Lydia envied her daughter's easy trust. She served Caleb the stew that had been waiting, and he ate mechanically, too tired for conversation. But when he finished, he didn't immediately retreat to his room. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have turned back sooner before the weather closed in. I kept thinking we had time, and then suddenly we didn't. But he's truly safe. As safe as anyone can be in a storm. The shack has a stove, plenty of wood, food, and Sam's been working these mountains for 20 years. He'll keep Thomas entertained with stories until morning." Lydia tried to imagine her city-raised son huddled in a mountain shack during a blizzard and couldn't decide if she should be terrified or impressed. "He wanted to prove himself," Caleb continued. "Kept asking questions about the work, the land, how to read weather signs. He's got good instincts. Natural seed on a horse. He'll make a fine rancher if that's what he wants." The compliment should have pleased her, but instead it highlighted how much of Thomas's life she'd missed while focused on simple survival. Caleb had seen qualities in her son that she'd been too exhausted to notice. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching him, for being patient with him. He makes it easy. He wants to learn. He wants a father." Caleb's expression shuddered slightly. I know, and I'm trying to be... He stopped, struggled with the words. I'm trying to be what he needs. What you both need. But I keep feeling like I'm pretending, playing a role I'm not qualified for. We're all pretending, Caleb. That's what building a new life looks like. Acting like the people we want to become until one day we realize we're not acting anymore. He considered this, then nodded slowly. Rebecca used to say something similar, that marriage was choosing each other every day until the choosing became habit. She was wise. She was, and I failed her in the end. Couldn't save her, couldn't... His voice broke, and he stood abruptly. I should check on the horses. Caleb, wait! He paused in the doorway, his back to her. You didn't fail, Rebecca. Childbirth is dangerous. Women die despite everyone's best efforts. That's tragedy, not failure. It feels the same. I know, but it's not. And believing you failed her means you'll keep punishing yourself for something that was never in your control. Is that what she would have wanted? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, very quietly, no. She would have wanted me to live, to be happy, to fill this house the way we planned. Then honor her by doing that, not by holding on to grief so tight there's no room for anything else. He nodded once, still not turning, then walked out into the storm. Lydia watched through the window as he crossed to the barn, his figure quickly swallowed by blowing snow. She sat by the fire for a long time, listening to the wind howl and thinking about the boy in the mountains, the man in the barn, and the fragile thing they were all trying to build together. Sleep came eventually, though it was restless and filled with dreams of Thomas lost in endless white. She woke to find pale dawn light filtering through the windows and Caleb already dressed, preparing the horses. Emma still slept, and Lydia debated waking her, then decided against it. She needed to ride hard and fast, and a 6-year-old would only slow them down. She scribbled a note explaining where they'd gone, propped it on the table where Emma would see it, then bundled into her warmest clothes and hurried to the barn. Caleb had Dusty saddled for her, and his own horse stamped impatiently, sensing the urgency. You know how to ride? He asked. I learned as a girl. It's been years, but I remember. Stay close and follow my lead. The trails narrow in places, and the snows drifted deep. She mounted with less grace than she would have liked, her muscles protesting the unfamiliar position. But once settled, memory took over, and she found her seat. They rode out as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold. Under other circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Now, Lydia could only focus on the trail ahead, on reaching her son, on confirming he was safe. The ride was harder than she expected. The cold bit through her layers, her hands went numb despite gloves, and the higher they climbed, the harder it became to breathe. Caleb set a punishing pace, and Lydia gritted her teeth and kept up, refusing to be the weak link. After what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, they crested a ridge and the line shack came into view, a small log structure with smoke curling from the chimney. Relief flooded through her so strongly she nearly wept. They dismounted and Caleb pushed open the door without knocking. Warmth and the smell of coffee greeted them, and there was Thomas, sitting at a rough wooden table across from a grizzled man who could only be Sam, playing cards and laughing at something the ranch hand had said. He looked up when they entered, and his face lit with excitement rather than relief. Mama, Caleb! You should have been here last night. Sam told the best stories about grizzly bears and outlaws, and I helped him cook breakfast, and we saw elk from the window this morning. No fear, no trauma, just the unfiltered enthusiasm of a boy who'd had an adventure. Lydia crossed the room and pulled him into a fierce hug, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and boy sweat and relief. I was worried about you. I'm fine, Mama. Sam took good care of me. And Caleb said I did really well on the trail yesterday. Didn't you, Caleb? Caleb nodded, his expression carefully controlled. You did. Followed instructions. Didn't panic when the weather turned. You've got steady nerves. Thomas beamed at the praise, and Lydia felt something crack open in her chest. The realization that her son was growing up, developing into someone who could handle challenges she'd spent years trying to protect him from. Sam stood and offered a respectful nod. Ma'am? Boy's good company. Didn't complain once, even when the wind got fierce. Thank you for watching over him. My pleasure. Kid's got the makings of a fine ranch hand. They stayed long enough for coffee and to ensure the cattle were settled, then began the ride back. The storm had passed, leaving the world diamond bright and still, and Thomas chattered the entire way about everything he'd learned and seen. Caleb rode ahead, and Lydia found herself studying his straight back, the easy way he sat the horse, the quiet competence that had kept her son safe when she couldn't. Trust. That's what this was. The slow, painful process of learning to trust someone else with the things that mattered most. They reached the ranch to find Emma waiting on the porch, bouncing with impatience. She launched herself at Thomas the moment he dismounted, and the two children tumbled together while Lydia and Caleb tended the horses. "Thank you," Lydia said as they worked, "for bringing him back safe." "I told you he would be." "I know, but I'm still thanking you." Caleb paused in brushing down his horse and looked at her directly. "You're a good mother, fierce about protecting them. Thomas and Emma are lucky to have you." The compliment caught her off guard and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I do what I have to." "It's more than that. You make them feel safe even when the world isn't. That's a gift." She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and returned to her work. But the words stayed with her, warming something deep inside that had been cold for far too long. That night, after the children were asleep, Lydia found Caleb in the main room again, staring into the fire as had become his habit. "Can I join you?" He gestured to the chair across from him, and she settled in, grateful for the warmth. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Caleb spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about honoring Rebecca by living instead of just existing." Lydia waited, sensing this was important. "I loved her, more than I thought I could love anyone. And when she died, I didn't know how to keep going. Work was all I had, something to fill the hours between waking and sleeping. But it wasn't living, just motion without meaning." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Then your letters started arriving, and I thought maybe I could build something practical, something that didn't require risking my heart again." "But you're not practical, Lydia. None of you are. You're real and complicated, and you make me feel things I swore I'd never feel again." Her breath caught. "Caleb, let me finish." His voice was rough but determined. "I'm not saying I love you. I don't think I'm capable of that anymore. But I care what happens to you, to Thomas and Emma. You matter to me, and that terrifies me because I know how much it hurts to lose people who matter." Lydia's throat tightened with emotion. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try, really try, not just go through the motions. I want to be the husband you need, the father Thomas and Emma deserve. I don't know if I can, but I'm tired of being afraid all the time." She crossed to him without thinking, kneeling beside his chair and taking his scarred, calloused hands in hers. "I don't need you to love me, Caleb. I need you to be honest with me, to keep trying even when it's hard, to build this life with me one day at a time. That's all I've ever asked." He looked down at their joined hands, then slowly brought hers to his lips and kissed her knuckles with unexpected tenderness. "Then that's what we'll do, together." The words settled between them like a foundation stone. Together. Not alone anymore, not separate people sharing space, but something more solid, something being built with intention. Lydia stayed kneeling beside his chair, her hands still held in his, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. Caleb released her hands slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Why? What's happening tomorrow?" "I need to start preparing for spring calving. The first of the herd will drop their calves in about 6 weeks, and there's equipment to check, supplies to organize, the calving barn to prepare. I thought, if you're willing, Thomas could help, really help, not just watch. He's ready for more responsibility." Lydia felt a surge of pride mixed with maternal worry. "He's only 9. I was 8 when I started working cattle. Out here, children grow up fast. He wants this, Lydia, and he's capable of more than you think." She knew he was right. Thomas had been reaching for purpose since Samuel died, trying to fill shoes too big for him. Here, on this ranch, he could grow into himself instead of a memory. "All right, but you promise me you'll keep him safe." "I promise." The simple vow carried more weight than any elaborate speech, and Lydia nodded her acceptance. She rose and moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Caleb? Thank you. for trying. It means more than I can say." He didn't respond with words, just a slight nod that somehow conveyed understanding. Lydia climbed to her room and lay awake for a long time, listening to the house settle and thinking about the man downstairs who was slowly, painfully learning to live again. The weeks that followed brought a shift in the household dynamics. Caleb began including Thomas in nearly every aspect of ranch work, patiently teaching him to read cattle, identify signs of illness, understand breeding cycles and market timing. The boy absorbed it all with the fierce concentration of someone who'd found his calling. More surprisingly, Caleb began to engage with Emma as well. It started small, asking about Rose's latest adventures at breakfast, showing Emma how to collect eggs without frightening the hens, teaching her to recognize different bird calls. The interactions were brief and sometimes awkward, but they were real, and Emma bloomed under the attention like a flower turning towards sun. One afternoon, Lydia looked out the kitchen window to see Caleb crouched in the snow beside Emma, the two of them examining tracks left by some animal. He was pointing, explaining, and Emma was listening with rapt attention, her small face serious with concentration. Lydia's throat tightened with emotion. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not unmarred by grief or fear, but present, choosing each other day by day. The incident with James Thornton continued to ripple through the community. Some people avoided Lydia after church, uncomfortable with her display of temper. But others, particularly the women, sought her out with a new respect. Sarah Mitchell became a regular visitor, bringing supplies and gossip, and the kind of forthright friendship Lydia hadn't realized she'd been craving. "You've got backbone," Sarah declared one afternoon over coffee. "Most Eastern women come out here and wilt at the first hardship, but you planted your feet and fought back. People remember that." "I made an enemy of the town's banker. James Thornton's been needing someone to stand up to him for years. His wife's worse. She's been insufferable since her daddy left her that money. You did the community a service." Lydia wasn't entirely convinced, but Sarah's approval helped ease the sting of social ostracism. The days grew longer and the sun stronger as winter began its slow retreat. Caleb spent more time teaching Lydia about the ranch operations, including her in decisions about breeding stock and market strategy. She discovered she had a head for numbers and organization, and soon she was managing the household accounts and correspondence with buyers. They fell into an easy partnership, working side by side during the day and talking by the fire at night. The conversations grew deeper, more personal. Caleb told her about his childhood in Wyoming, his father's death when he was 15, the years of hard labor that built this ranch from nothing. Lydia shared her own history, growing up in Philadelphia society, the scandal of marrying an impoverished artist, the slow dissolution of everything she'd once taken for granted. "Do you regret it?" Caleb asked one night. "Marrying Samuel?" Lydia considered the question honestly. "No. He gave me Thomas and Emma, and for that alone I'd endure it all again. But I won't pretend it was easy. Watching him choose art over responsibility, watching him waste away while still insisting everything would work out. Love doesn't pay rent or feed children. Is that why you wanted something practical with me? No romance to cloud judgment?" "Partly, but also because romance failed me once. I thought I'd rather have honesty than passion." "And now?" She met his eyes across the firelight. "Now I think maybe honesty is its own kind of passion. Slower, steadier, but no less powerful." Something flickered in his expression, hope, perhaps, or recognition. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. "Even when I was terrified, even when I wanted to send you away, some part of me knew you were exactly what this place needed, what I needed. We needed you too. You gave us a home when we had nowhere else to go. It's more than that now, isn't it? More than just practical arrangement." Lydia's heart quickened. "What are you saying, Caleb?" He struggled with the words, his jaw working. "I'm saying I think I might be falling in love with you. Not the desperate, all-consuming love I had with Rebecca. Something different, quieter, but real." The confession hung between them, vulnerable and brave. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the unexpected gift of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood the cost of loving again. "I think I might be falling in love with you too," she whispered. He pulled her from her chair into his lap, and she went willingly, settling against his chest as his arms came around her. They sat that way for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, two broken people learning to be whole again. When they finally separated, Caleb's eyes were bright with emotion. "I want to do this right. Court you properly, even though we're already married. Take you to town, buy you something pretty, let everyone see that you're mine by choice, not just legal arrangement." Lydia laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "I don't need pretty things, Caleb. I just need you, and the children, and this life we're building. You'll get all of that, but you deserve pretty things too." The next Sunday they rode to church again, and this time when they entered, Caleb kept his hand at the small of Lydia's back, a public claim of partnership that made several women sigh with romantic approval, and several men nod with understanding. James Thornton glared from across the church, but Lydia held her head high and ignored him. She had nothing to apologize for. After the service, the school teacher approached with a proposal. "Mrs. Turner, I understand Thomas has had some education back east. We're starting spring term next week, and I'd love to have him join us. He could ride in with you on Sundays and stay through the week, board with the preacher's family." Lydia's immediate instinct was to refuse. She'd barely gotten used to having her son in the mountains overnight. A week away seemed impossible, but Thomas's face had lit with such hope that she couldn't dismiss it immediately. "Could I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Let me know by next Sunday." On the ride home, Thomas pleaded his case with the passionate intensity only a 9-year-old could muster. He wanted to learn, wanted friends his own age, wanted to prove he could handle responsibility. Caleb stayed neutral, letting Lydia make the decision, but that night by the fire he offered his perspective. "He'll be safe. The preacher's a good man and the school teacher's strict but fair, and he'll come home on weekends." "He's so young. He's growing up. You can't protect him from that." Lydia knew he was right, but the thought of her son gone 5 days a week made her chest ache. Still, wasn't this what she'd wanted? A stable life where her children could thrive instead of just survive? She agreed, with conditions. Thomas would come home every weekend without fail. If he was unhappy or unsafe, the arrangement would end immediately. And Caleb would check on him midweek when he went to town for supplies. Thomas started school the following week, riding off with a determination that made Lydia simultaneously proud and heartbroken. The house felt too quiet without him, and she threw herself into preparing for spring, planning the garden, organizing supplies, learning everything she could about calving season. Emma thrived with the extra attention, following Lydia everywhere and chattering constantly. She'd grown attached to the ranch animals, particularly a young calf that had been rejected by its mother. Caleb showed her how to bottle feed it, and the patient care he demonstrated with both child and animal made Lydia fall a little more in love with him every day. The first calf was born on a frigid March morning. Lydia woke to find Caleb already gone, and when she looked out the window, she saw lights blazing in the calving barn. She dressed quickly and hurried out, leaving Emma sleeping. The barn was warm and smelled of hay and cattle. Caleb stood in a stall with Sam and Pete, watching a laboring cow with focused attention. He looked up when Lydia entered, surprise flickering across his face. "What are you doing here?" "This is my ranch too. I want to learn." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but stay back unless I call you." First-time mothers can be unpredictable. She watched as the cow strained and bellowed, watched as Caleb murmured encouragement and checked her progress with confident hands. When complications arose, the calf positioned wrong, she saw him make a quick decision and reach in to correct the problem, his face tight with concentration. The calf slid free in a rush of fluid, and Caleb quickly cleared its nose and mouth. For a terrible moment, it lay still. Then it shook its head and took a gasping breath, and Lydia felt tears of relief stream down her face. "It's a heifer," Sam announced. "Good strong one, too." The mother cow turned and began licking her calf with fierce devotion, and Lydia was struck by the simple miracle of it. New life emerging from pain and struggle, the continuation of cycles that had played out for millennia. Caleb came to stand beside her, his shirt soaked with sweat and other fluids, his face exhausted but satisfied. "That's the first of about 40, he said. "It's going to be a long few weeks. Then it's good we're in it together." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, and pulled her close despite his dirty clothes. She didn't care about the mess. She just held him, and felt grateful for this man, this life, this unexpected gift of belonging. The calving season was brutal. Days and nights blurred together in an endless cycle of monitoring, assisting, and praying. Lydia learned to read the signs of approaching labor, to assist when needed, to bottle feed the orphans and revive the weak. Her hands grew rough and her back ached constantly, but she felt useful in a way she never had doing society embroidery or managing a city household. Thomas came home on weekends full of stories about school and friends, but he always headed straight for the barn to check on the new calves. Emma appointed herself official calf namer, giving each one elaborate titles like Buttercup the Brave and Dandelion the Swift. They were becoming a family. Not the family any of them had imagined, but real nonetheless. One evening, as Lydia sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold, Caleb joined her with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this." "Bless you." She accepted gratefully, savoring the warmth and bitter comfort. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade. Then Caleb spoke. "I went to Rebecca's grave today. First time since you arrived." Lydia's breath caught, but she waited for him to continue. "I told her about you, about Thomas and Emma, about how the house is full of life again, just like we planned. I think," his voice caught, "I think she'd be happy. That she'd like you, that she'd approve of what we're building." Tears blurred Lydia's vision. "I hope so. I've never wanted to replace her." "You're not replacing her, you're writing a new chapter. There's a difference." He set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "Lydia Harper Turner, I know we're already legally married, but I want to ask you properly, without desperation or fear clouding everything. Will you marry me? Not as a practical arrangement, but as partners who've chosen each other? As people who are building something real?" Lydia's heart hammered in her chest. "We're already married, Caleb." "I know. But I want to choose it this time. Choose you. Choose us. No more pretending it's just convenient. I love you, and I want everyone to know it." The declaration was clumsy and heartfelt, and Lydia loved him more for the imperfection of it. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you. Again. Properly." He kissed her then, gently at first, and then with growing passion, and Lydia felt something inside her finally settle into place. This was home. Not the building, not the land, but this man and these children and the life they were creating together. They planned a small ceremony for late April, after calving season ended. The preacher agreed to perform a blessing of their marriage at the ranch, and Sarah Mitchell organized the whole affair with militant efficiency. The day dawned clear and warm, the first real hint of spring. Wildflowers dotted the meadow, and the creek ran high with snowmelt. Lydia wore a new dress that Caleb had commissioned from the dressmaker in town, simple blue cotton that made her eyes shine. Emma wore matching ribbons, and Thomas had slicked his hair back with such determination that Lydia had to resist the urge to muss it affectionately. The neighbors gathered in the yard, ranchers and their families, Sarah Mitchell in her finest purple, even the school teacher and the doctor. Notably absent were James and Helen Thornton, but Lydia didn't miss them. Caleb stood waiting in his dark suit, freshly shaved, his eyes locked on Lydia as she walked toward him. Thomas and Emma flanked them like miniature attendants, and the preacher smiled with genuine warmth. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to bless and celebrate the union of Caleb Turner and Lydia Harper Turner. Though they are already married in the eyes of the law, they come before us today to renew their commitment to each other and to the family they've built together." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows they'd written themselves, promises of honesty, partnership, and choosing each other through whatever came. When Caleb slipped a new ring onto her finger, a simple gold band engraved with wildflowers, Lydia's vision blurred with tears. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Again. The preacher grinned. "You may kiss your bride, Caleb." And he did, to the cheers and applause of their community. The celebration that followed was joyful and chaotic. Sarah had organized a feast, and neighbors contributed dishes until the table groaned with plenty. Music played, children ran wild, and for one perfect afternoon the ranch felt like the center of the world. As evening approached and guests began departing, Caleb pulled Lydia aside to the porch where they'd had so many meaningful conversations. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously. You?" "More than I thought possible." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood watching the sun set over the valley. "I keep thinking about that first night, When you stood on this porch looking so desperate and determined, I almost sent you away. I know, I'm glad you didn't. So am I. You've given me my life back, Lydia. You and the children. This house feels like a home again. You gave us a home when we had nothing. I think we're even. He turned her in his arms to face him. This is just the beginning. We've got years ahead of us, years of hard work and struggle and joy, years of watching Thomas and Emma grow up, years of building something that lasts. I can't wait. They kissed again as the stars began emerging in the darkening sky, two people who'd found each other through desperation and chosen to stay through love. Inside the house, Thomas and Emma were showing Sam and Pete their favorite hiding spots, their laughter ringing through rooms that had been silent for too long. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility. Spring arrived in earnest over the following weeks. The garden plot that Rebecca had once tended came back to life under Lydia's care, rows of vegetables pushing through the dark earth with determined optimism. Emma appointed herself official waterer and took the responsibility with solemn seriousness. Thomas thrived at school, bringing home assignments and stories about his friends. He'd found his place among the ranchers' sons, boys who understood hard work and the rhythms of the land. But he always came home on weekends, eager to help with whatever needed doing and to share everything he'd learned. Caleb and Lydia settled into married life with the ease of people who'd already weathered storms together. They worked side by side during the day and talked by the fire at night, sharing dreams and plans and the comfortable silence of true companionship. One evening in early June, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance over the meadow, Caleb took Lydia's hand. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Rebecca's room upstairs, the one you've been sleeping in. It's time to make it ours. Remove her things, redecorate, start fresh." Lydia squeezed his hand. "Are you sure? There's no rush." "I'm sure. I loved her, and I'll never forget her. But she's gone, and you're here, and it's time to honor that reality. Will you help me?" "Of course." They spent the following week carefully packing Rebecca's belongings, her clothes donated to women in town who needed them, her books integrated into the main shelves, her pressed flowers and mementos stored in a trunk in the attic where they could be preserved but not enshrined. Emma discovered a beautiful quilt in the process, hand-stitched with intricate patterns. "It's so pretty," she breathed. Caleb knelt beside her. "Rebecca made that for the baby she was expecting. I want you to have it, Emma. I think she'd like knowing it kept someone warm and loved." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? For me?" "For you." She hugged the quilt to her chest, then impulsively hugged Caleb. He stiffened for just a moment, then his arms came around her small body, and Lydia saw him close his eyes against emotion. When Emma ran off to show Thomas her treasure, Caleb remained kneeling, his face working with the effort of holding back tears. "You all right?" Lydia asked gently. "I am. It hurt less than I thought it would. Giving that away. Maybe I'm finally healing. Maybe we all are." They repainted the bedroom in warm cream, hung new curtains Lydia sewed herself, and arranged the furniture differently. The result was a room that honored the past while embracing the future, familiar enough to feel like home, different enough to be theirs. Summer arrived with long golden days and warm nights, filled with cricket song. The cattle thrived, the garden produced abundantly, and the ranch prospered in ways it hadn't for years. Caleb attributed it to good weather and better management, but Lydia suspected it had more to do with the renewed energy of a man who'd rediscovered purpose. One afternoon, while Caleb and Thomas were in town for supplies, and Emma played in the garden, Lydia discovered something that made her world tilt sideways. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a physical force, equal parts joy and terror. Another child. A new life created not from desperation, but from love. But childbirth had killed Rebecca. What if... She couldn't finish the thought. That evening, after the children were asleep, she told Caleb. He went completely still, his face cycling through shock, fear, and something that looked like cautious hope. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I haven't had my monthly flow in 2 months, and I recognize the signs." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I'm terrified," he whispered against her hair. "So am I. But also," his voice broke, Also happy. That wrong. To be happy when I know what could happen? It's human. And I'm happy too, despite the fear. They held each other for a long time, two people who understood the fragility of life and the courage required to embrace it anyway. The pregnancy progressed without complication. Lydia continued her work as long as she could, gradually scaling back as her body changed. The doctor examined her regularly and pronounced everything normal, but Caleb remained vigilant, watching her like a hawk for any sign of trouble. Thomas and Emma were thrilled at the prospect of a sibling. Emma immediately began planning how she would teach the baby everything she knew, while Thomas took his impending big brother role with utmost seriousness. As fall arrived and Lydia's belly swelled with new life, the whole community seemed invested in the outcome. Women she barely knew stopped by with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Sarah Mitchell knitted enough blankets to outfit an army of infants. "You're one of us now," Sarah explained. "We take care of our own." The words settled into Lydia's heart, filling a space she hadn't known was empty. She had a community, a place she belonged, a future that extended beyond mere survival. Winter returned, but this time the house was ready, filled with laughter and warmth and anticipation. On a clear January morning, as the sun rose over snow-covered mountains, Lydia's labor began. Caleb's face went white with fear, but he forced himself to stay calm for her sake. The doctor was summoned, Sarah Mitchell appeared with her no-nonsense competence, and the hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. In the bedroom they'd made theirs, surrounded by people who'd become family, Lydia fought through pain and exhaustion. She could see the terror in Caleb's eyes every time he looked at her, the memories of Rebecca overlaying the present moment. "I'm not her," she gasped between contractions. "I'm stronger than I look, and I'm not leaving you. Do you hear me, Caleb Turner? I'm not leaving. Promise me." His voice was ragged. "I promise." And she meant it. She had too much to live for, this man who'd learned to love again, these children who needed her, this life they'd built from broken pieces. As the sun set and stars emerged in the winter sky, a new cry joined the wind outside. Caleb's son came into the world healthy and strong, and Lydia watched her husband hold his child with trembling hands and tears streaming down his face. "A boy," the doctor announced. "Strong lungs, good color. Congratulations." Sarah cleaned the baby and placed him in Lydia's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face and felt complete. Not because this child filled some void, but because he represented everything they'd overcome: fear, grief, loss, and chosen hope anyway. "What will you name him?" Sarah asked. Lydia looked at Caleb. They discussed this, planned for either possibility, but now the moment felt too significant for old plans. "Samuel," Caleb said softly, after Lydia's first husband, and James, for his middle name. Samuel James Turner. Lydia's throat tightened with emotion. Caleb was honoring her past, acknowledging that Samuel had given her the children who'd saved them both. "Samuel James Turner," she repeated. "Welcome home, sweetheart." Thomas and Emma were allowed in to meet their brother, and their faces filled with wonder at the tiny human they'd helped bring into being. Emma declared him perfect, and Thomas promised solemnly to teach him everything about ranching when he was old enough. That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Caleb and Lydia lay in their bed with baby Samuel between them, watching him sleep with the vigilance of parents who understood how precious life was. "I was so afraid," Caleb whispered. "The whole time I kept seeing Rebecca, kept reliving that day. I thought I'd lose you too. But you didn't. We're here, all of us. Safe." "We are." He reached across their son to take her hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being stubborn enough to stay that first night. For pushing me when I wanted to hide. For choosing this life with me even when it was hard. For giving me a family again. You gave us one too. We saved each other, Caleb." He kissed her gently, carefully, mindful of her exhaustion. "Get some rest. I'll watch him. You need sleep too." "I will. But right now I just want to look at him. At you. At everything we've built. I want to memorize this moment." Lydia understood. This was the moment all their struggles had been leading toward. Not perfect, not without scars, but real, honest, earned. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, secure in the knowledge that when she woke, her family would be there. Not the family she'd imagined in her Philadelphia girlhood, not the family Caleb had planned with Rebecca, but the family they'd chosen together from the wreckage of their pasts. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the ranch in white. Inside, the fire burned low, and 3 children slept peacefully while their parents kept watch. Spring would come again, bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas would grow into a fine young man. Emma would continue filling the house with stories, and Samuel would take his first steps across floorboards worn smooth by generations of life. There would be hard years ahead, droughts and difficult births, illnesses and losses, the ordinary struggles of building a life in unforgiving country. But they would face it together, this family forged from necessity and tempered by choice. And on the hill overlooking the valley, beneath a simple stone marker, Rebecca Turner rested in peace, her dream of a house full of children finally realized, just not in the way anyone had expected. The ranch endured, as it had for years and would for years to come. But now it was more than just land and cattle and buildings. It was a home, a place where broken people had learned to heal, where fear had given way to courage, where practical arrangements had transformed into something infinitely more precious. Love. Hard-won and honestly earned, built on foundations of trust and partnership, and the daily choice to keep trying. As the first light of dawn painted the mountains gold, Caleb looked at his sleeping wife and children and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not the absence of pain or struggle, but the deep satisfaction of knowing he was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the people he was meant to be with. He had walked through fire and come out the other side. They all had. And in the process, they'd built something that would last, not just for them, but for the generations that would follow, a legacy of resilience and love and the courage to begin again. The frozen promise that had brought Lydia to his door had thawed into something far richer than either of them could have imagined. And as the sun rose over their valley, painting everything in shades of hope, Caleb Turner finally allowed himself to believe in the future, their future, together.